I'll go. Alrighty. I will go to you, Michael. We're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Hey, thank you, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Michael Papisch. I'm a resident of Berhampore, recently retired, but I've been a senior public servant for 30 odd years, and really appreciated the opportunity. And what I wanted to do was talk about the issues and interconnections between the district plan and Let's Get Wellington Moving and the cycleway consultation. I know this is the district plan meeting, but really I saw quite strong interconnections between them, and I really didn't see how they kind of came together as a coherence, or they were making kind of assumptions that I felt that needed to be questioned through the consultation process. 4 points to highlight to people on the screen. Firstly, there's got to be some clarity around about the assumption around population growth that we're looking to cater for in Wellington. The whole consultation documents suggest a population growth to mid-century of between, I think, 50 and 80,000. As I was researching for my submission, Stats New Zealand put the latest projections for their population growth for Wellington at around about 28,000. That makes quite a difference, I suspect, in terms of the type and nature of city that we will have, but also the type of decisions that we will need to make. And so I think getting clarity around actually what it is that we're looking to kind of manage in terms of population growth, I think is really crucial, and it seems to be contested. Point two was something that came up from the drop-in sessions that were held in Newtown that I attended. They were great, thank you. I thought that was a really good way of engaging with this. And what became really clear to me that wasn't clear hitherto was particularly in the Let's Get Wellington Moving consultation documents, is that intensification, which I think is reality in Wellington to deal with any population growth, is intended to be concentrated in a number of quite narrow corridors in Wellington. The Let's Get Wellington Moving consultation options 1, 3 and 4 were, as explained to me, are based on intensification being concentrated in the Central City, Basin Reserve, Mount Cook, Newtown, Berhampore, Island Bay corridor, and that's what justified the use of light rail as opposed to fast bus networks. My submission suggests that intensification should be more diverse across Wellington rather than concentrated in a narrow corridor. Let's Get Wellington Moving option 2 anticipated a scenario where intensification occurs across, for example, Kilburney and Miramar, which led to a different solution from a transport point of view. In my view, putting 28,000 or 50,000 or 80,000 in a corridor from the Central City through to Island Bay is going to lead to suboptimal outcomes and a poor living environment. Point 3 is if intensification is a reality, we will need more green spaces, and I appreciate that there might be a difference between the spatial plan and the district plan, but nonetheless, what was highlighted for me in the district plan, especially given smaller apartment sizes and the concentration of people, we need to build more green spaces into the framework, both public spaces, but also outdoor space per dwelling. I've lived in intense urban environments in London. The need for public green spaces and private green spaces is critical to making those highly desirable living environments. And I could not see that built into the framework of the district plan. That again also highlights for me that the need to think around about intensification being spread across more of the city rather than being concentrated into a narrow corridor as implied by Let's Get Wellington Moving options 1, 3 and 4. That might also then lead to discussions in my suburb around the future of green spaces, and particularly around the Berhampore golf course, and around about whether that moves from a very specialist use to something that is more amenable to a wider public use. I appreciate it is used by the public more widely, but it's hard to walk around the Berrimpool golf course if you're going to get hit by a golf ball. Point 4 is that I think the district plan and Let's Get Wellington Moving and the cycleway consultation needs to be supporting all modes of transport, including cars, and in making provision for car parking. In my locality, the example I talked through in the at the drop-in centre was in Lower Rintle Street. Lower Rintle Street is going to be a mass transit corridor plus a cycleway. How those two things are going to be connect together while still allowing vehicle traffic was described to me as being sorted out in the detailed planning. I don't think that is good enough. That needs to be reconciled before when the district plan, Let's Get Wellington Moving, and the cycleways, when decisions are taken on them in terms of directions of travel.
Okay, Michael, can I just ask you, is that the end? Or okay, that's great. You just used your 5 minutes perfectly.
Thank you.
Sorry, it does go quickly.
Indeed.
So I think Lisa actually isn't here. I've just had a little note. So we will go to, is Elliot here? Yes, we'll go to you, Elliot. Thank you.
Hi there, thank you. And look, I'm representing Peter Charlesworth, who's also on the line here today, and he's the owner of 11B Wilmshurst Place in Tawa. I'm a principal planner at Catris, and just by way of disclosure, I used to be a senior planner at Wellington City Council as well in the resource consents team. Our submission relates to the large lot residential zone, and the need really to provide for housing growth in the city, and not just limited to infill or intensification in our inner suburbs, but also the need to provide for greenfield development and growth in our outer suburbs. As you probably appreciate, not everybody wants to live in apartments. There's a general sort of view that apartments are a little bit less safe than, the market really demands a house on a residential lot. And so we also need to cater for accommodate growth in our outer suburbs also, and also to provide housing choice. There's a need to provide housing choice. There's a lot of talk around intensification and providing apartments in areas, but people want a range of different options for different stages of their life and different needs to provide for housing choice. The draft district plan rezones this particular property, but also a number of other properties, as a large lot residential zone. Now, part of that lot is currently zoned general residential. So one of the things that we'd like to oppose is the zoning of, from rezoning of general residential to large lot. That reduces the lot yield and kind of goes against what I think we need to do, which is to accommodate the additional housing supply and provide for additional houses within Wellington. So we'd really like the council to relook at that particular zoning, particularly as it would be inconsistent with the character that directly surrounds the site. So the portion of that site that is zoned or proposed to be zoned large lot residential is surrounded to the north, east and west with general residential. So it just seems a little bit out of character to rezone that portion of his site to large lot residential. The other area that we do oppose is it's proposed that within the large lot residential zone that there would be 100-metre building separation. Now this goes, the same provisions that apply in the large lot residential propose to allow a minimum lot size of 3,500 square metres, which would typically have a dimension of say 50 metres by 70 metres with the shorter dimension along the site frontage. And in that sort of configuration, it's actually just not possible to site buildings that are 100 metres apart. So if you've got a 50-metre frontage, you can't put a 50-metre frontage and another 50-metre frontage and actually fit houses on lots of that size. It just isn't actually able to be accommodated. And particularly when you consider Wellington's steep topography, it's even more challenging because sometimes there's a need to provide lots or clusters of houses that might have less of a building separation together, and then there might be other areas that remain open. We also think we had a bit of a look around the rural areas that already exist within Wellington, and that 100-metre separation would just be inconsistent with the sort of building separation you find in many of our existing rural areas. So it's actually really out of character. For example, we cited examples on Blackrock Road in Newlands, which is zoned rural now, and had building separations of about 18 to 20 metres. We cited rural lots within Gladys Scott Road in Tawa. They have building separations typically of about 16 to 30 metres. And we also cited examples in Horokiwi and the Takapu Valley, which also had building separations of about 20 to 30 metres. So we would suggest that a site coverage is probably a better tool to control the buildings and the separation of buildings and the provision of open space rather than this 100-metre rule. And finally, we opposed a 5-year restriction on subdivision as proposed in the large lot residential area. There's no real direct correlation between that provision and the district plan, and it's unclear what you're trying to achieve here. We think that other provisions, such as the site coverage that I mentioned before, are probably a much better tool to control character and that provision of development openness, particularly when there might be a need to do a boundary readjustment. If someone was to subdivide and then they're locked out for doing any other subdivision for 5 years in that area, if you need to do a boundary adjustment for whatever reason, you basically just can't for 5 years. So it just seems a bit silly. So that's my 5 minutes up.
Or just if you want to make a closing statement.
No, I think I've got the clear points across.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor,
Yes.
I just got a technical question, and I see we've got John McSweeney online. I wonder whether he could answer that.
We're saving the questions till we've heard from everybody, so make a note of it, and we'll have it at the end. Yeah, I've got a few technical questions on that as well, but thank you, Elliot.
Yeah, I didn't
it's a subject that probably as councillors we don't know a lot about.
That's all.
Yeah, but we'll stick with our planned approach and make a note of that question. So thank you, Elliot. That was really valuable to hear from you. Now I think we've got Francis from Karori Baptist Church in Zedipta. Thank you, Francis.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for letting us present today. My name's Frances Lane Brooker and I'm one of the elders at Karori Baptist Church. I'm here with Peter Hart presenting our submission on behalf of our church congregation. Tim Jacob, who's one of our pastors, sends his apologies as he was not able to attend today. Karori Baptist is located in Marsden Village. Our church has been in Karori since the 1920s and we've been at our current site since the 1950s. We're a family-friendly church of around 200 people. Our facilities are currently used by the public for a wide range of activities, church and community-based, including mainly music, playgroup and various other one-off uses. Our vision is for Karori Baptist Church to be at the heart of a thriving Karori, Wellington and Aotearoa. The existing property at 161 to 163 Karori Road has 2 zonings, residential and commercial. We've got contiguous sites that run between the main road and Marsden Avenue. We've got 2 houses on our site, the church auditorium and an attached old back hall. We wish to take the church through a design process that could result in 3 development options being placed before the church towards the end of this year. These options could be something like rebuilding the hall, rebuilding the main road sites, or rebuilding the main road and the Marsden Ave sites. We're beginning a process in the next few weeks of engagement with our neighbours in Marsden Village, Karori businesses and with community groups to identify what community needs there could be accommodated on our site. We want to involve the community in our design. We're considering a wide range of possibilities and would like zoning that supports this. So just briefly moving on to our submission, our main objective in making our submission was to ensure we're part of the planning process for Karori, given the development activity that will be occurring on our site over the next several years. You'll have the details before you, but in summary, our submission indicated our interest in discussing with the council the option of treating our 3 properties as mixed-use development with zoning options to support this. We suggest the council consider a higher height restriction over Marsden Village, which is currently being suggested to be a local centre zone in the draft plan. And so I think it's currently flagged as 12 metres, and the next level up across the city is 18 metres, which is why we opted for that option. And thirdly, we asked the council to consider medium density residential zoning in the residential areas adjacent to Marsden Village as a buffer between residential and commercial developments. So we're wanting to keep a wide range of options open for our site as we consider its redevelopment. And we just commented it's quite difficult currently to calculate our development envelope because we've got the existing district plan, the draft plan provisions, and we're also aware and cognizant of the RMA changes. So yeah, that'll just give you a sense of where we're coming from at the moment and wanting to inform you about what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. It's interesting feedback. It's obviously really complicated, isn't it, trying to plan in this kind of environment. Thank you. Okay, so now we've got a few extras, sorry, that aren't on my list, not that, now I'm just wondering how we handle this. So Peter and Stephen, are you the only ones that are left to speak?
Yeah, I wasn't.
We've got two.
I'm just here with Frances.
Okay,
Yeah.
and Peter Charlesworth, were you here with Elliot? Am I right in thinking that? Yeah, so in that case, Stephen, we'll go to you.
I'm sorry, I haven't heard any other different time. I applied for this time and I hadn't.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sure that there's been, everyone's done their best, but for some reason you're not on my list and that doesn't matter at all.
Maybe I misread something. I'm not in my normal place at the moment. Well, look, my points were about housing affordability, livability of the city and heritage. And I'm in support of intensification. But I wasn't in support of how that is being presented and thought about in terms of the district plan. And one of the reasons I believe the intensification is a little bit more site specific, a little bit like one of the, I think it was Elliot who had a site specific issue. I think I think the issues sit around zoning, Tiaru flats, lots of car parks. There is land banking going on. There's those sort of issues going on. There's open space above buildings. All these are open for intensification for housing. So people in larger blocks of houses, 6 stories or whatever, can come down the lifts, and like overseas, this is what a lot of people talk about. Then you're in the shops, you're in the activities, and zoning's not like the old day, where you had a lot of manufacturing in New Zealand. You didn't want somebody bashing in a car panel shop at 11 o'clock at night with people living next door. So the zoning laws, because we don't have that, the zoning laws can be much more flexible than they used to be, and building standards can be better. So that's just the point. But my main point is the main approach that the council has taken is to reduce regulations or rules, take away people's rights in certain area. And it's based on the premise that these private businesses want to intensify, and that's good, because to solve the affordable housing crisis, you need to increase supply. And that assumption is fundamentally flawed. Supply doesn't determine price. And you can see this all over the place. If you go to buy an Apple phone, there's plenty of Apple phones to buy. The price is set by how much you can maximize the profit. They cost way more than an Android phone. All the talk is that their costs of manufacture aren't much more than the Android phones. That's just an example. Price doesn't supply doesn't affect price, and things like the supermarkets used to throw away a lot of food. So there's clearly plenty of supply, but the price is still high. Cars, there's 4.4 million cars in New Zealand. The price of cars is still high. It's a big cost for people. So supply does not determine price. It's of how much you can get a consumer to pay. We're already in a housing, so the issues are not what the council is trying to do by allowing what I would call bully building, just building 6-story buildings largely where you want along these corridors without regard to the local area, is just not going to fix the affordability problem, because the issue is not about supply, it's about price setting. Those are the issues about zoning, where you are allowing building for residential purposes. So it's misdirected intensification. That's my central point, and I agreed with quite a few of the points Mr. Papisch if I said his name right, correct. So that's probably enough. There's dozens of examples. The clearest example that's well, I think,
Just like to wrap up with one more. Yeah.
If you went to buy a Turkish carpet, there are thousands of millions of them, but the price is set by you when you haggle. It's about you, and that's the same with housing. So increasing supply is not going to fix the housing affordability. There's more issues at stake than that, and I've written about it.
Thank you, Stephen. That's an interesting perspective. I think possibly one that we could ask questions and discuss. Now, I've got Grant Griffiths trying to connect to audio, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. Perhaps, Damien, if you're able to see whether Grant wants to actually join our conversation. Now,
sorry, yes, Deputy Meffrey, I'll work with Grant. Grant's actually down for the next session.
Oh, is he? Okay, all right, that's good. Now, I wonder also if we can return to Councillor Calvert had a technical question, so we might go to that now, and then we'll open up for general discussion.
It was really when Elliot was talking about the different zoning, and it's different to what we've been talking about with zoning. I was just getting a bit confused, and that's why I was asking for John. Is that, I think you talked about large lot zoning, Elliot, and it was just not the terminology that we've been discussing, and I just wonder what I've missed. That's all. Because
yes,
we've been talking about, zoning for 6+ stories, or that sort of thing, or up to 3 to 4 stories, and that. So I just was a bit.
So let's get some advice, because I must admit that was something I'm not very familiar with either.
Yeah. Is John there?
John should be there. John, are you able to enlighten us as to that particular?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, so the large lot rural residential, they're essentially a rural residential zone, so they're enabled where we have existing to lower density residential areas, and most of those are on the periphery of the urban areas. So as Elliot mentioned, I mean, in Tawa there are a number of those. And so I suppose in terms of national planning standards, it gives us sort of a template of different zones to apply. So we've applied that to that area. I mean, I think Elliot's raised some really good points that we'll probably need to look a little bit more closely at, because it sounds on the face of it that we may need to check some of those standards again. And if there's already an existing general residential zone which is getting rezoned to large lot, maybe that doesn't sound quite right. So Elliot, so I think we will have a close look at that, which is what we're doing as part of the whole reviewing of all the submissions anyway. So.
Can I ask a question too? I thought Elliot raised a reasonable point about the, he said that buildings have to be 100 metres apart, which does sound a bit sort of prescriptive. Is there any, would you like to comment on that?
Oh, that's the point. I think that doesn't sound quite right to me, and that it does seem a little bit restrictive. So we will be looking at that. So I can't probably add a lot more than that at this stage.
And yeah, and I guess he also made some points about would site coverage be a better way of controlling development rather than lots of different rules. So I guess that's all something that can be looked into.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Just another if I can have another technical question of John. It's about
Sure.
which was it was actually Francis, who you're talking about Koori Baptist and what you were looking at doing. Is there John, just under the current rule setting, is there opportunities there to be able to work with the Baptist Church? Because obviously district plan changes are some time away, whatever they will be, but is there opportunities to do a bit more with that site?
Yes, I think so. Hi, Francis.
Hi.
Long time no see.
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm being sort of aware that you've been looking at redevelopment options for a number of years, haven't you, Francis? So,
yes.
Again, I mean, the points you raised, I mean, I wasn't aware of those. It's sort of a detail I haven't got down to, but I certainly happy to have a further discussion on those things if that would help. I think one point probably to make is that, of course, the medium density residential standards, which came in, of course, is a lot more enabling of development than some of the zoning we went out with the draft district plan, because you may recall that the standards came out just as we were releasing the draft district plan, so we haven't been able to accommodate those standards. So they will enable a lot more development as of right in the general residential areas, and so we are looking at that and incorporating those into the draft district plan at the moment. So that might, if part of the site is zoned general residential, Francis, that might change that situation quite a bit for you.
Okay, then, thank you. We're just watching the changes as they flow through, so we'll be really interested to see what comes through in the proposed plan. But it might be quite helpful if we could just have one efficient meeting with you, just to talk through our options to make sure we understand kind of where we're at currently.
Sure.
Okay, so what I found about this conversation is there's a lot of quite specific issues, and that's going to be, I guess, a question for me, John, is how can we remain flexible in responding to people's desires to build quite specific, developments, while we still retain the overall planning framework for the city?
Yeah.
And I guess, because I think that goes a little bit to what Stephen had addressed. It actually goes a little bit to what Michael addressed about green spaces. And actually, I was hoping Michael's still here because I want to ask him a question later. But my difficulty listening to some of these really specific examples is not quite understanding how flexible our district plan is going to be to deal with specifics, while still trying to set a kind of a framework for the city.
Certainly the intention is to try and remove unnecessary regulation and provide as much flexibility with a lot more policy direction, so that it's quite sort of stated out front, what's we're trying to achieve at a sort of a higher level. So the strategic objectives section is extremely important in terms of those broader city outcomes. But in terms of the actual zone structure, I mean, there's a lot more, as you know, a lot more enabled development and infill development, and our business areas and commercial areas are also quite enabling, but with certainly we've done a lot of work around the design guides, and they're completely revamped, and so ensuring high quality but higher density. So I'd say there's more flexibility into the district plan now, but we need to have those checks and balances in place. So there is a lot of it, if you can't meet standards, you will trigger a resource consent process, and that's the point at which we have those one-on-one conversations with people wishing to develop their property.
Okay, so I can see some hands up, so that's good, because I was about to say it's open floor. So Stephen, I saw yours first, and then Francis.
Lovely. The comment about more flexibility, a lot of that flexibility seems to be put onto residential housing areas, rather than in the areas where intensification is really needed, like Te Flats and the semi-industrial corridor up Lower Adelaide Road. Whereas I think most people don't mind those areas intensified because there isn't as many people living there currently. So it's would you say that there is now far more permissions or opportunities to intensify for housing in commercial areas?
Yes, definitely those areas you mentioned, we've raised the heights in those areas. So like the Adelaide Road is now part of the central city, that enables a lot more development. And part of that reason why is the things that I think you talked about, there's things like Let's Get Wellington Moving and the mass transit routes. We don't have those defined, and they're not confirmed yet. So, but there is a bit of a signal that we know that there's going to be a need to intensify along main transit routes, and so the district plan is attempting to, I suppose, anticipate additional growth in those areas.
Is there any requirement to build intent, 6 stories or whatever you're talking about, in like the car parks on Tiara? Is the council going to require that?
We can't require it. We have proposed, the councillors have asked us as officers to require a minimum height requirement of 6 stories, 21 metres in the central city. So that's really, I suppose, trying to avoid some developments that have happened that are sort of lower density in quite important areas, like the central city, Taranaki Street, as an example. So it's really encouraging developers to go, well, you should be maximising the use of your site as much as possible. Acknowledging also that, not every site can be built up at great height because there's ground conditions which mean that it's just not.
Hey, I've got a few other questions. Stephen, did you have one last quick point to make?
Yeah, just the Taranaki site is an interesting one, because I've heard a person say that, who knows one of the developers, that the council virtually made it impossible to build a high level site there. So that's why it's low level.
So Stephen,
I don't know.
Interestingly enough, we actually have a submission in our next session from the Methodist Church. And I think they might be raising something along that line. So we'll be hearing from them. But yes, if you don't mind, I think we might note that and keep moving, because I've got a few other hands up and this time does go quite quickly. Thank you for your points. Francis, and then Councillor Calvert.
I just had a question about servicing constraints in Karori and how real those are, and whether the council would like to comment on them and the impact they're likely to have on future development.
Do you wish me to say something just in terms of...
If you can say something briefly on that, John, and then I've got a couple more hands, so I want to keep moving a little bit with the conversation, but yes.
Just in terms of the district plan approach, we're not recommending a great deal of, we're not proposing higher density in the Karori area because of the constraints on the Three Waters network. In particular, wastewater, and so that's because the development, if we encourage a lot more new development, they'll come up against the problem of lack of ability to service the site. So it is an issue that needs to be addressed in the longer term. Yes.
Thank you.
I can give some background to that.
Okay, well, Councillor Calvert, it's your turn, and then we've got Elliot, and I've got a question for Michael.
Only because I know that personally, look, I did try and move an amendment last year about that officers do look at what it would take to bring more services into Karori, but it didn't get passed. But what I've done is I've subsequently had a meeting with the Chief Planning Officer and the Chief Infrastructure Officer about what can be done to actually understand what investment is needed in Karori to enable more development to happen, because I know that area is wanting more development. And so they've both undertaken to look at what can possibly be done. So I'm still waiting on a response to that, Francis. So
thank you.
We'll just keep the a little bit of pressure on in terms of that, because I think it's really critical, because at the moment, no real intensification in Karori can happen for at least 10 years, which I don't think that's it really needs to be brought forward.
Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Elliot.
Oh, I was just putting my hand up because I think my client Peter wanted to raise questions, so that's why I just was helping him out. So, Peter, do you want to speak?
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just trying to find the hands up, but no, normally
it's all right.
But hey, look, it's just a simple question, and totally agree with all this kind of trying to simplify things as well. And so, obviously, we're looking at the 16 acres we've got, maybe going down to 3,500 square metre sections. I just wanted to find out though, that, and it's probably a question for John, overlaying all this in my area is the ridgeline policy. So it's one thing having a district plan that says you can do some of these things. Then you get this kind of overlay of the ridgeline policy, which is like a kind of a bit of a can trump everything. So I just wondered, is part of this process going to be looking at how that ridgeline policy works in with the new district plan, because otherwise we could come down to a point where it's, yeah, that all looks fine because we want to get more intensification of this land that's a little bit on the periphery. And then you trump it as a council just with the ridgeline. No, we're not going to do it. So I just wondered if we could get some clarity on how the council's going to approach that.
Certainly. So the position today is in the draft district plan to retain ridgelines and hilltops. We have looked really closely at the provisions to ensure that it's actually working effectively. So, I mean, the intention is to enable some development, relatively low densities, and to work in with the landform, and so there's controls around earthworks. I mean, the point Elliot was making around the zoning. So I think, you know, what we've tried to do in the district plan is that where it has a general residential zoning, then that's not appropriate to have a ridgelines and hilltops overlay over it, because it's contradictory and sending wrong signals. Where at one point we're saying enable more housing, but we're actually restricting by having an overlay. So the zoning is a pretty key consideration to that issue.
Okay, thank you. Now, Michael, I've been waiting to ask you this one. So you said you'd lived in quite dense areas, but they had lovely green spaces. And I guess just as a general, this is more of a general comment, what did you think was well done about those green spaces? And can you give us any tips as to what we might look to do if we have to provide pocket parks in the city or something like that?
So look, there are the dense urban environments that I've lived in have three kind of components to them. First is large parks. So I'm thinking about my experience in London and Paris in particular, but large parks. I lived in a suburb of Clapham in London, and it had a very big open park, multi-use, so it wasn't dedicated to kind of sports fields or for nature walks or for gardens, but in a sense a kind of multi-purpose kind of sort of space. The second is a neighborhood in a very dense area. You would kind of have a square with trees and grass and benches and that kind of thing, a place that people could go with their families, with their kids. They could kind of run around. It's not a large open park, but you know, it's a small kind of green space within a very dense kind of environment. The third component is that in a lot of, and this is my experience particularly in Paris, is that there are courtyards within the building design itself. So what looks like a big monolithic block of residential space is actually a space in the middle where again people can move out of their buildings. They don't necessarily have to go across the street or to a park, but there's a place where in a sense they can congregate, have a break outside, have a tea or coffee outside. And I think to me, the kind of those kind of nexus kind of coming together gives people kind of opportunities to just get out of their place, stretch their legs, or go around and kick a ball, or whatever it happens to be with their kids. And I think that's the kind of the combination I think you'd be kind of looking for. In the dense urban environment that is anticipated from Mount Cook, Newtown, Berhampore, Island Bay, which is kind of the zone that I live in. I think that's got to be built into the design rather than hoping that somehow that will just happen. And I do think that there needs to be quite a conscious conversation around about the Berhampore golf course, which I think could be the fulcrum of a very nice green space. You know, that large park kind of environment. And I think Councillor Foon, I think, has written about that in the past, and I think that really does be the conversation.
I'm just interested if anyone else has a view as to whether if council proactively provided green space where we wanted to encourage development, that could be successful. So I'm thinking in my own area of Kilburnie, we provided upgraded the Leoneville pathway, and I've seen people respond to that by upgrading their houses along the route and sometimes extending them and what have you. Do you think there's and this is an open question for anyone really, is there scope for council to actually try to provide the carrots to foster development in the way we want it, as well as the sticks, which is the rules? And I'm interested in anybody's perspective. I see Stephen's got his hand up. Stephen.
Yes, I think the idea that, yeah, you can do something and signal to people that this is an area where we want intensification, for example, would be really good. Though I personally feel you need to approach the people in the area and say, we want to have a 6-story buildings in this particular area, so that there's consent, because at the moment, this more flexibility looks like bully building, that, you know, you can be in your house and suddenly you're going to have a 6-story building very close to you, and that's quite destructive approach. Whereas if you did signal, here's going to be a park, and these houses in this area we were thinking about, i.e. site specific, could be 6-story building high. Now there might be somebody on that site has no intention, no capacity to develop, but it becomes a sort of signal that to developers that they could approach those people or do something in a way when those people move on, that these are sites that are more favoured for intensification, rather than this sort of open slather of flexibility for developers when it won't lead to affordable housing. Sorry, I spoke too long.
Oh, that's fine. Diane, Councillor Calvert, did you have your hand up still for a reason?
Yeah.
Or was it just a hangover?
Yeah.
Okay, where you go?
No, I did want to ask a question, and this is probably directed at everyone, and it's more a case of how well socialised do you think this draft plan is amongst Wellingtonians? Yeah, just trying to get a sense there, and whether there's any views about what we can do.
That's a good one. Right, Michael, Elliot and Stephen, and that'll probably wrap us up. And if you could be just brief with that, it would be good.
Look, I'll go first quickly. Look, Councillor Calvert, I think kind of the general vibe around intensification is known and has been socialised, but the details have not. The thing that surprised me when I went to the drop-in was the relationship between the Let's Get Wellington moving corridors and where intensification and densification was to occur. I hadn't really drawn those kind of connections together, and I suspect many people haven't, and I suspect that they do not understand that where the intensification is slated to occur is driving the Let's Get Wellington moving options. I don't think people have drawn the threads. I've never seen it explained that way at all. Over.
Okay, thank you for that, Elliot.
I'll probably echo Michael's sentiments. I think there's a general awareness of the need and the desire for intensification, particularly in the areas, but the specifics of the planning for growth, the draft district plan, whether people are as aware of specific provisions of that, I'm not so sure. People might be more aware of the Intensification Act that comes into effect or needs to be implemented in the district plan in August. And probably also quite aware of Let's Get Wellington moving because it gets a lot of media attention, but whether people are as aware of the draft district plan and specific provisions of that, I'm not quite sure, but I definitely do echo Michael's sentiments that I think there's a general understanding that the city is going to change in terms of that intensification in areas.
Thank you. And last word to Stephen, I think, although I'll also see if our councillors have anything to say. Stephen?
Yes, certainly. Certainly there is more awareness of intensification, and I know quite a few people from different political perspectives, and there's a very strong disbelief in the intensification plans of just taking away people's rights to allow what I would call bully building going on. So there was a lot of publicity around getting involved. There seems to be less publicity around getting involved with contributions, and there is not enough awareness around what it could actually mean for people. So I sort of think there are quite big gulfs in knowledge, and council appeared to be more upfront, and now appears to be less upfront.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Councillor Voon and Councillor Young, did you have anything you wish to add? Because we're running, we've got just a couple of minutes left.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Young, for jumping in. Yeah, I would just like to thank you all for your views. It is not been an easy process, and we understand that there are massive trade-offs. But listening to you all, and it is quite interesting with the specific, but then the general, what we're trying to achieve here. So yeah, I just thank you for bringing your kōrero to us today.
And Councillor Young.
So thank you. And actually, I've got my serviceman just arrived at the door, so I've got to let him know. So, let me just say thank you for your views, and I need to get my dishwasher sorted, so apologies.
All right, and that probably brings us to the end of the session. So I would also like to add my thanks. And as Councillor Calvert, do you want to last minute? Thank you or anything? Okay, so I'd just like to add my thanks to my colleagues for coming. It's always incredibly interesting to hear what our residents have to say. I know that the staff will have been taking notes. I've taken quite a few notes myself, and we do our very best to feed this into the bigger picture so that ultimately we can do the best for our city. And I know that's what we all absolutely aspire to and want. So thank you again for your time.
And Deputy Mayor Free, I just want to say to Francis that if you want some support, let me know.
All right.
I'll be pleased to see that site being developed.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Ka kite.
Bye.
Welcome everybody, and apologies for taking a few minutes to get online. This is our second session today of hearing from people on the district plan. So welcome to you all. The way in which we run these forums is everybody gets a chance to have 5 minutes, and I do try to keep an eye on the time. And then when that's over, we have an open discussion and anyone can ask anyone any questions or make any points. We do have staff members here to help support us because they know the technical things that we don't always know. And I also would just like to acknowledge my councillor colleagues. I've got Councillor Calvert and Councillor Boone with us on this table. So if I just have a look at the order that we've got here, we're hearing from Carolyn and Paul first from the Wellington Methodist Parish. Then I think we've got Sean, and then we've got Graydon, and then we've got Grant. And I don't see anyone extra. Oh, we've got Mike.
Yes.
From
Wakakotahi, that's right.
Okay, lovely. Well, we'll put you on the end on the list, and we'll get started. I'll put my hand up to signal that you're at the end of your 5 minutes. We're very close, and if you could wrap up at that point, that would be great. So, welcome to Carolyn and Paul from the Wellington Methodist Parish.
Thank you for your welcome. Is it possible to? Would you like me to speak, Carol? And
okay, I'll explain what we're doing first. Paul and I have done a semi-joint submission. He's actually done a PowerPoint to try and visually explain what we're talking about. I am the manager here at the Methodist Parish, and Paul is our Conservation Heritage Architect Advisor. So the idea is that he will talk to his PowerPoint, which in theory someone from the council is going to run for us.
Yes, we've already gone through that, so that sounds good. Yep.
And then we'll get a bit of a double header, which we will try and keep within the 10 minutes. You can cut us off at the end.
Okay. All righty. So, Damien, are we ready to go with that PowerPoint? Paul, did you want to say a few words while the staff might be? Oh, here it comes.
Yeah, so the first slide just shows the site that we are dealing with, which is 75 Taranaki Street, Courtney Place in the top right, and the site is bounded by those yellow lines. You probably recognise the street frontage of the church. Next slide. So this site is composed of various new buildings where I've listed as new. The heritage buildings that I've listed with a blue background, which is the original church. There's the old hall. Both of those were built before 1900. And there's Drama Christi, which was built in 1905, which is the third new building. sorry, the third heritage building. There's 2 heritage trees, and all the rest are new buildings. If you could go to the next slide. So what I've done is that I've coloured the heritage buildings in blue, and the new buildings in with an orange outline, and the red is the car park. And the proposal was that the whole site is a heritage area. Oh, sorry, Grant was going to say something. No,
I was having a private conversation. Keep going.
Yeah. So the whole site is quite complex, and to have a simple heritage area over the whole site, our recommendation is this does not apply, because some of the newer buildings do not warrant such a higher status as what they've got at present. So next slide. So if we look at the newer buildings, these are photos from Google Maps of the newer buildings. So building number 3, you'll be able to help me, Carol, is the, what's that building now?
All right, so building number 1 and 2 is a commercial premise at the front, which is a pharmacy and a cafe. Our office block in number 2 is a hall, which we use as a community hall, which is a modern building. And number 3 is a car park that was generated back in the 60s when we demolished an old house that was there. And that is a transitional thing while churches don't do anything in a hurry. That is a transitional thing while we work out what we want to do and what we can afford to do. Which is the premise of our submission, is that we need to retain flexibility to continue to be a community space. Making it heritage, we remove that flexibility. Keep going, Paul.
And number 4, Carol.
Oh, number 4 is the front. Isn't that a front car park? I can't see it totally on that.
Oh no. So the at the bottom,
that's the back.
Right, yeah, that's the back offices.
Yes, sorry, there's 2 car parks on this site, both of which were generated when old buildings, number 4 was generated when a building there burnt down. And what we call a tennis court was put on for relief car parking for large events and so forth.
And there's also that community building, which is number 4. You might not see the whole screen by the sounds of things.
It does sound like you're making. It does sound like you're making quite a clear point. Do you have any last minute things you'd like to say to wrap up? How many more slides are there?
We started at 10:44, and my
okay,
clock
no, that's fine. You can have a bit more time.
Yeah. So so I'll go through quickly. Next slide. The Methodist Church is the 5th most frequent church and congregation for New Zealand stats. Next slide. The Presbyterians have developed commercial areas to support the preservation of their church. Next slide. The Anglicans have developed an area for the preservation of their church. Next slide. And so is the Roman Catholics. So we think it's punitive with this change of rules to list the whole site as a heritage area, so that the Methodists cannot do the same when the Anglicans, Catholics and Presbyterians have already done that. Next slide. So in summary, we'd like to be to develop some buildings for the community that mean that we can preserve the Old Hall and the Drama Christi. And the last slide is next. That's better. And that's our summary points, that the Methodist Church has a track record of preserving the church with little site development. All three buildings should be continued to be maintained, all three heritage buildings. The upgrading of the existing newer buildings identified previously and where we were discussing to a heritage area is not warranted. And the district plan should be clearer when it says Wesley Church and associated buildings. We want those listed properly. And for finance, the flexibility in site development creates financial flexibility so that the church can continue to improve their good works in the community. So, and that's it.
That's excellent. I think that you made some pretty compelling points myself, but thank you for that. And we'll have a chance to discuss it when we come to the end, and perhaps ask for some officer advice for you.
And finish 3 minutes early. That's good.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were allowed the 10 minutes for being an organisation or whether we were being quite strict about the 5. But anyway, we've struck a compromise, which I think is good.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Sean, on behalf of, am I in the right place? Yes, Sean, on behalf of Ara Putama, Aotearoa, the Department of Corrections. So, Sean, welcome.
Hi, I'm Andrea Miller from Department of Corrections as well. So Sean and I will tag team a little bit if that's all right. I thought I'd just give a quick introduction around what the department's strategic objectives are. There's been a significant shift both internationally and within New Zealand from moving to quite a traditional prison model to recognising that for many of the people in our care, a more community-based solution is a better one. In communities, of course, if we have community-based care, there's better opportunities for both reintegration and rehabilitation. While there will always be a need for prisons for some people, generally prisons are not an ideal environment if you're wanting to kind of circuit break in terms of people actually getting out of crime, and certainly not great for intergenerational behaviours and shifting intergenerational crime. So what does that mean? The whole of the justice sector, which includes corrections, is spending a lot of time and energy now looking at how we can basically stop the prison pipeline. And that, of course, starts right from the initial intervention by the police through the courts and then through to corrections. And so there's a lot of work, for example, going on in the remand space around reducing the pipeline into the prison system. But for corrections, there is a real shift away from the traditional prison model to more community-based interventions. That really looks, for all intents and purposes, from a council perspective, it looks like housing, but with a lot of support wrapped around it. And the support that's wrapped around it will be rehabilitation. So what's the root cause of the crime and the offending? That may be alcohol and drug addictions. It may be a history of how people were raised and unpicking all of that, so psychological interventions. And the other half is reintegration. So for many people who are in our care, they have not had the foundational kind of parameters that we all know, how you cook a good meal, how you budget, how to get a job, how to hold down a job, set the alarm, get up, all that kind of thing. So this that's what we call reintegration. So helping people actually to function as productive members of society and not fail along the way because they've never been taught the right way, and then they don't have ongoing support. So that's kind of reintegration services. So I might jump over to Sean and translate what I've said in kind of a strategic view into what we would like to see in an RMA or district plan view.
Can you keep that fairly tight? Because I've just been reminded that it is 5 minutes for everybody, whether it's an organisation or not. Sorry about that. I know it goes really quickly.
No problem.
Yeah. Oh, Sean, we can't hear you for whatever reason. Still can't hear you yet.
I can probably jump in.
Yeah.
Having problems.
It might be helpful if you tell us specifically how the things that you want or don't want out of the district plan.
Sure.
In relation to the points you've already made.
Yeah, so I would like to make the point that we find Wellington City Council extremely good to deal with in your consenting space. And we don't find that with all councils, so kudos there. One of the things we really would like to see is more acknowledgement that we're basically a residential activity, but with support wrapped around the people who live in a house. What we tend to find with some councils, not all, is there's a bit of othering that goes on. So that might be by way of calling us something else, so supported housing or something else. And usually if you other us by way of calling us a different activity other than residential, then often we will get othered by way of the rules as well. So a residential activity might be permitted, but a supported house might be a discretionary activity. So what we're keen to see is actually just a shift in accepting that a residential activity and households look and smell differently across the board. They're not kind of one size fits all, and that just because there is support and or supervision wrapped around people who live there doesn't mean that suddenly it stops being their home or stops being a residential activity.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Sean.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I think we've run out of time, but we'll be able to discuss this more when we come back to the discussion.
Look, apologies about that. Technological issues at my end, so apologies.
It happens.
It's sorted now, though.
Okay. But we will need to move on to Graydon. So for Graydon from Tricycle, it's your turn for your 5 minutes, and it does go fast.
Thanks, kia ora everyone. So I'm Graydon. I work as an environmental social science researcher at Manaaki Whenua Land Care Research, which is a Crown Research Institute, and Kai Cycle and I co-authored the submission. So we are really supportive of the changes in the draft that relate to circular and local production, consumption and management of waste, and we're really supportive of the new definition of community gardens being permitted in certain zones. So most of our submissions is around specific stuff in relation to that draft definition of community gardens and potentially developing further ones. So a bunch of specific stuff, but I suppose what we're kind of basically arguing in terms of what we'd like to see in terms of community gardens is just a bit more flexibility in that definition. So lots of community gardens have kind of ad hoc retail, they might have a seed sale or a seed swap, that kind of stuff. So we'd be keen to see those kind of things being enabled in the community because they have really positive benefits. And Christchurch City have got an example of doing this quite effectively, we think. Secondly, we're also keen to see for-profit food production being enabled in Wellington. So that might be kind of market gardens, vertical farming and future innovations. So we're keen to see the plan kind of basically enable this as we move into the future. So our one suggestion we're thinking is that we could create a new definition for urban agriculture in the plan, and that could be a permitted or controlled activity depending on the zone, and council could, if it was a controlled activity, council could have standards and aspects they reserve control over. For example, scale, design and layout, whether animals are involved, transport movements, hours of operation, retail, noise, dust and those kinds of things. So the second thing we were keen to see a little bit more thinking on is where small-scale composting fits in the district plan. So at the moment, so that's both as a standalone activity and in conjunction with community gardens and other types of community activities. So at the moment, the only mention we can find of composting is under the heavy industrial activity, which includes composting of organic materials. And so this is one of the most restricted activities in the plan, and it seems a bit extreme to us to include small-scale composting as a heavy industrial activity. So we've got 3 suggestions for how we could address this. We could actually create a new small-scale composting definition in the plan and have that potentially as a permitted activity. So you can manage potential adverse effects like odour, runoff and pest predator as general nuisance under the RMA or potentially through the waste bylaw. Second suggestion could be to actually develop a definition of small-scale composting in the plan. So Auckland Council have done this. They've got a 10 cubic metre maximum volume as a permitted activity per site across the region. We think there's a few issues with this, but it is potentially an option. The other suggestion we've got is actually amending the heavy industrial activity to clarify the scale and nature of composting that refers to. because at the moment it could basically capture kind of backyard composting. So we're just kind of keen to see a bit of tightening and a bit further thinking around some of these definitions to really enable these types of really holistic and great activities that are already happening. So that's it for me. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you, Graydon. Now, Grant, to you. And we can't hear you. You'll need to unmute. I do it all the time.
Here we go.
That's it.
I'm right. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So may I start, Sarah, by asking if you and Diane and Laurie have read my submission through?
I have to confess, I've had a very brief look at all of the submissions because they have not been available to us for terribly long. But we were very...
I can understand that because
we're
I've
very
got access to
keen to hear what you've got to say, and we'll be taking notes.
All right. Well, let me make the first point that 5 minutes is not a very long time. I'm just starting my clock, my stopwatch going.
I know.
So 5 minutes is certainly not long, because with what's been presented to us, and I'm going to address specifically SNA because that's my major area of interest. And 5 minutes is not a lot of time to cover it. Where I'd like to start is that what we do should have honour and integrity to it and link in with our legal system and laws and background and everything we stand for. And it's my opinion that the path we've taken to get to where we are now doesn't afford any honour and integrity unless there's a change in the path. Let me talk about successes first of all. The Zealandia project is a great success. It's multiplied up the bird life in the area unquestionably. And the birds spread by the seeds they consume and so on. They spread vegetation around as well. Zealandia is good, voluntary, and has worked very well. I'd also commend the council for their getting global research to summarise the submissions that people have made, and also the Friends of Submitters program. That's very well done. I would like to record my objection to the first 2 or 3 years of the project team's operation. I'm an experienced project manager. I'm a project manager, international qualification certified, and I've worked in project manager in law and accounting and management and marketing fields for my entire career. The project team totally rejected any input from stakeholders that didn't accord with their own views. And there was a bullying approach, I believe, and I say that as a professional, and it could be that that project team bears examination by a professional body such as PwC or someone like that, or a recognised project management expert. Let me come back to my fundamental legal training. By what authority does the council and the government bring in these SNA procedures and the project team? And the answer is, till the present, there is none. But I've read thousands of pages of government papers, and it's clear to me that the whole process has been set up to avoid any challenge or any appeal or the participation of our law system. This is wrong. Clearly wrong.
Can you make your last points? I hear that you've got a real problem with the process, but do you have anything you'd like to suggest? And can I ask you just to...
The fundamental underlying document from your consultants is deeply flawed. Any professor I worked with would say it was a flimsy piece of work.
Okay.
The animals and birds and plants on our section, they're friends. We're conservationists. We believe in what's trying to be done here, but it's been gone about the wrong way.
Okay.
And my underlying approach is our property is an intergenerational asset, and you can't take over 50% of it without compensation.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. And thank you for that. And we'll obviously have a chance to discuss and ask questions when we get to that point. We've got one more person, and that's Mike. And then we'll have a chance to open the floor. Thank you, Mike.
Kia ora anō. Thank you. So I'm here on behalf of Waka Kotahi, the transport agency. So my presentation will understandably be mostly around transport matters, also a little bit relating to urban form. Just to set the scene a little bit, our strategic direction, Arataki, gives us 5 main priorities: improving urban form, transforming urban mobility, significantly reducing harms, tackling climate change, and supporting regional development. So that's where we're coming from when we looked at the draft plan. And to summarize what we found when we looked through the plan, there was really a lot that we really appreciated. It's a great forward-looking plan. Several aspects that we're particularly happy with were the reverse sensitivity aspect, where you've got people starting to build, there's a lot of building pressure in Wellington. People are starting to locate close to state highways and rail corridors. And currently the plan doesn't really address reverse sensitivity. So we understand that there's a health effect on the future residents of those areas. So it's great to see direction in the plan requiring people to ensure a good noise environment for those future residents. So that was one. There's a strong emphasis in the plan on walking and cycling, reducing reliance on private motor vehicles, providing public transport links, increasing density around rapid transit stops, providing for micro-mobility, all of which very much aligns with our strategic direction. And the infrastructure chapter in particular, I'll commend your plan writers because it's very clear. The objectives and policies are laid out in a way that makes it clear where there's overlap with overlays that have different that have other values. So that could be SNAs or outstanding natural features and landscapes, and those kind of overlays where there's infrastructure involved. It makes it really clear what the balance is, what the trade-offs are, and how to deal with that, so that the values are preserved, and also that the infrastructure can continue to be maintained and upgraded when necessary. And yeah, so those are really the three things I'd really like to congratulate Wellington City Council on. There were some minor things where we thought there could be tweaks. I suppose one of them was the development areas. Kilburnie bus barns makes a lot of sense. It can provide lower vehicle kilometres travelled through central. The other two, Lincolnshire Farms and Upper Stebbings, they're sort of peripheral. They kind of probably mean more car dependency into the future for those residents. But we also understand you have obligations under the NPS for urban development, and maybe that's where you need to go. I think the preference would be for greater density closer to those transit stops and the existing urban area. So perhaps that is something that you've had to look at, and we accept that. And the commercial zones in particular. Oh, sorry, Diane, you're on mute. Was that directed at me?
Yeah, I was just saying, could you just wrap up quickly because
it's been 5 minutes already.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Just one question was around the new commercial zone. It seems to be just one location and it's currently an empty site, and there's no mention or very little mention of active and public transport there. And I'm just wondering if that was as a result of discussions with the owner of that block, or the other commercial zones seem to be very much oriented around active and public transport, which we'd fully support. And just that one empty block doesn't seem to have the same level of support for active and public transport.
Okay, sorry, which block was that?
I think it's called the commercial zone.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, we can certainly ask for some advice from officers on that one, and perhaps also some advice on some of the things that were raised around the composting definitions. Do we still have? We have Sherilyn. Sherilyn, could you make a comment on that lack of planning for active and public transport in that commercial block, and possibly the composting, or is John still there?
No, I'm here. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we will need to keep all of this quite brief because I sense that we need some time. We've only got 15 minutes, sadly.
Yeah. So just in relation to the commercial zone question, I'm actually unsure of which site's being referred to, so I have to go away and investigate that and see what the story is.
Take it offline, perhaps.
Yep. And in terms of the composting, we can certainly look at that. It's not something that I've been directly involved in myself, so again, I will go away and chase it up with the relevant people just to see if there's anything else we can do in that space. Great.
Well, those are the two things that occurred to me. Now I'm going to throw it open for anyone to ask a question of anyone or to make a further comment. Councillor Foon and Councillor Calvert, did you have any questions?
Yep, similar to what I asked the previous session, but really from the participants here, how well do you think the wider population of Wellington City understand the changes proposed under the district plan?
Well, it looks like you've got a whole lot of stunned faces because
I'll speak. My impression is not very well. And that's my comment. I invite other people to comment.
Just on the heritage side, heritage buildings and the height restrictions and what have you, and also what is going to be listed, I'd suggest not very well too.
And I think having gone through the submissions, which was actually really hard work because it's logically laid out. But I also think that you have pockets of very well organised groups that know it very well, but it's not a generic, based on the comments that were coming through the submissions, just like us, we were very specifically focused on us and what it meant to us. The collective heritage, we just left as being, and we specifically focused on us, substance over form. And I think a lot of the stuff is the general public, as you know, they won't comment. They won't comment until it actually hits on them. So I'm not sure that there is a collective understanding. I found it fascinating listening to different people because I actually thought this was a table about heritage. And so listening to all this other stuff was fascinating because some of that stuff I had not picked up because I hadn't read it with your guys' eyes. And so for me, that's a general comment from someone who was really interested in it. But I don't know what anyone else thinks.
Thank you. Councillor Foon. Sorry.
Kia ora, yes, it is very complex, and if I had known I was up for this, I probably wouldn't put my hand up for councillor. But anyway, here we are. Learning is learning.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is for Paul and Carolyn. That's quite exciting hearing about your space, and I hope that the outcome is that we can look at that for you. But I guess the question I have, two questions, Have you worked with council before on projects that you've got in mind? And maybe what does the nearish future look like for you to actually enable this space? Because you're sitting on a very big opportunity there.
I can answer that. Yes, we've just finished a significant seismic strengthening project of the church, and in that have actually considered the heritage of it and reinstated a number of heritage items. But the other side of that is that we have used funds that we have taken years to accumulate to do that project, and actually need some flexibility to generate more. For us, the issue is not so much that we've got a development project in mind and that we suddenly want to bring the bulldozers in and can't do that. It's purely that we want the flexibility to decide to do that and the ability to continue to be relevant in the future. And the minute that you make us a whole heritage site, our car park can have nothing done to it. And that's just nonsensical. And so all we're asking for is substance over form. It is not a single section, it is a multi-use section and treated as such. So yeah, we don't have anything concrete. We do have a master plan that says that we need to do something better than a car park, but we don't actually know what that is. We've got some ideas about multi-use to make it more flexible, but yeah, nothing concrete. So I can't give you a hang your hat on a 7-story apartment block. We don't have that at the moment.
Well, I thought you made a very good case, but I think it sort of highlights what we discussed in our last forum, is there's this tension between allowing flexibility so you can get the great outcomes, but also trying to have a consistent approach to the city so that you're doing some strategic planning at the same time, and it is a very hard tension. Does anyone have anything to say about the SNA problem? Because I know we are going to hear a lot about that, Grant. We're going to hear, and I take your point about the process, but you know, we're hearing things like people need to be able to keep maintaining their trees, and people do feel a sort of an imposition coming on them from this.
If I may have a minute.
Yes, but I do want to hear some other people's feedback too, but you have your minute.
All right. The report from Global Research was great. It recorded 200 people speaking in opposition to the SNA proposals, which had never come through the project reporting back to council to that point. So that's good. And I'd commend you on having a look at what all the other people's comments on SNA were that came through. So thank you. I've had my minute.
Oh, thank you. Just as a general thing, I don't know how many people know about the SNA proposal, because we'll have a view on that. It may be something that people don't particularly want to discuss. But, you know, obviously Grant feels very strongly that what's happened is that we do have, SNA stands for Special Natural Areas, and what's happened is council wishes to protect some of these on private property. And it's not just council, it's actually come from government. And they've asked us to, all the councils, to kind of participate in this. But if it's, again, it's one of those things, if it affects you, it's a very big deal. If it doesn't, probably nobody knows about it. So we'll move on. Is there anything else people wanted to ask questions about? Or yes, Sean? Yes.
Thank you, and I hope my microphone's working all right this time. I guess it's a question mainly for Damien and Sherilyn as council staff, but also something for the councillors to be aware of. And as Andrea said, you know, we've got the policy settings in the draft plan pretty much right around residential activities that will be undertaken by the department, and likewise for the zoning for the Arahata prison, subject to some minor tweaks. But something to be aware of is that the community correction sites, so those are the sites where you know, you have your probation officers reporting community work will be undertaken out of. There's actually no permitted status for those particular activities within any zone in the draft plan, other than the correction zone, which applies to Arahata prison. And that's really problematic for the department into the future, and that resource consent would be required for any upgrade of a site, an existing site, or to establish a new site. So I just wondered if that was a deliberate move by the plan drafters, or if that was something of an oversight. It's certainly something that we've captured in our feedback. So it's there. But you just wondered if the council officers had any knowledge around that, or if not, just something to take away and think about.
Sherilyn, do you have any ability to comment right now?
Unfortunately, no, I'm not across why that might be, Sean. So I will again follow up with the relevant people and just see what the intent was there, and whether we need to make some changes.
Okay, no, that'd be appreciated. Thanks, Sherilyn.
No worries.
Okay, Paul, you had your hand up, and I think Councillor Foon did as well.
Yeah, just on page 16 of 29 of the operative plan, it mentions that Wesley Methodist Church and associated buildings is the thing that is listed as protected, and it's just the tightening up of the associated buildings is the one-liner that I'd like to conclude.
Okay, I think that definitely we've noted that concern.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Foon.
Two questions, one for Sean and Andrea. How are you going in this space in other cities around New Zealand? Like what is the general trend and success rate?
Yeah, I'll talk to that. So recently we've been through, or the proposed Waikato district plan process has just concluded. I guess in essence there we've got a prison, that's the Spring Hill facility. That was the first prison in New Zealand to have the special purpose correction zone imposed on it, and we've basically rolled the same proposed provisions by and large over the Arahata prison, and worked really closely with the council, the Wellington council officers, to use those same provisions, so we're not reinventing the wheel there. In terms of the community sites and supported residential housing, yeah, by and large, we've got all the provisions, appropriate provisions that work. So that's a recent example. But yeah, likewise, we've been doing this, you know, for the department, on behalf of the department, for a number of years now, and subject to one or two appeal processes that we've had to go through. Yeah, we've had really good success in terms of imposing the right provisions. We're certainly not asking for the world. And we're realistic around, you know, those zones in which, particularly the community sites, are not appropriate. We actually will request discretionary status, so resource consent being imposed for those zones where it's not appropriate. But yeah, by and large, in those right zones, we've been having good success, and we're happy to provide those examples, those concrete examples of where that's happened to council staff and councillors.
Thank you.
And one more question, Deputy Mayor, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, of course. We have time.
Great. Just a similar one for Graydon. When you're talking about the different composting methods in, say, for example, Christchurch and Auckland, like clearly they are progressing there. What are the types of outcomes that we're looking for by changing these definitions, or what are we trying to enable?
Local management of waste that has holistic benefits. Local management of organic waste that has holistic benefits while managing adverse effects. And by holistic benefits, I'm talking about connection with nature, building ecological knowledge, restoring soil, growing food, those kinds of things, connecting with neighbours, all of those kind of relational benefits that come through these types of community activities.
Right. And are you seeing those outcomes in the other cities?
Yeah, there's emerging evidence of that in stories and that kind of stuff. And there's some research that colleagues and I are doing on that as well. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you. Well, I think we have come to the end of our time, and I'm sorry it was a little bit of a skedaddle, but there was a lot of very interesting points made, and from a very wide and diverse bunch of submitters. I'd like to thank every single one of you. I think it was very valuable, and we all learned a lot from each other. And thank you, Carolyn, for making that point. That is one of the advantages of these forums. You maybe get a little bit less time as an organisation, but then we have this hopefully quite fruitful time for discussion, which I think is actually really worth it and quite useful. So I know our staff have been here listening, and they'll obviously have some things to follow up. So I'll leave it to them how they choose to get back to each of you. But on behalf of myself and my two council colleagues here, I really like to thank everybody, genuinely thank you all for your time and for the points made. So
thank you. Thanks for.
So welcome everybody, and also welcome to my two colleagues, Councillor Calvert and Councillor Pū. This is the third session we've had today, so we've already had quite a lot of interesting submissions on various different aspects of the district plan. So what we are doing with this is everybody gets 5 minutes just to say what they want to say about the aspect of the district plan they're concerned with, and we listen. And then at the end of that, there's actually a chance to have a bit more of an open forum where we can ask questions of each other. Councillors can ask questions, participants can ask questions. We can ask questions of the officers, and we do have officers with us. So thank you to those people as well. That's Andrew. And yes, we also have some democracy services people running this internet space for us. So we were going to start with Duncan, then move to Jeff, then move to Marilyn, and Kari and friends. I think we did have another participant, but they're not coming. So, and I will put my hand up when you get to the end of your 5. It goes really fast. So, and I might have to ask you to wrap up if we really are going on, so that we have that time for discussion. So Duncan, I'd like to move to you. Thank you for coming, and we're looking forward to hearing what you've got to say, and you've got 5 minutes.
Great, thanks very much, and thanks very much for having me along and for hosting this event. Yeah, I've submitted a written submission, and I guess I'm sticking pretty close to that. I'm talking about the SNA, and as a resident, yeah, just wanted to register my opposition to that. I know there's sort of a bit of a debate, or maybe the council doesn't view it as a debate, as to whether the government or the RMA requires you to identify and then categorise the SNAs and include them in the district plan. Yeah, I guess it'd be good to know. I mean, I don't know how much you can say legally, but get a better understanding of that and the council's interpretation of why they're doing that. I guess my biggest concern on the basic side is that, you know, you've got a lot of people in the area I am where they've planted natives, they've kept them up, they haven't planted exotics or that type of thing necessarily, although there are exotics in there. And now it's sort of a disincentive to plant natives, or to even keep them in there before the district plan comes into effect, because there's only a 3-metre buffer between buildings and native trees. So it means that you know, you could end up with these massive trees growing right next to your house, and yet, you know, if you've got a view or you want to get sun, you're basically just going to be surrounded by these huge natives within 3 metres of the house. And I don't know anyone who would really want to necessarily continue living like that, apart from the risks involved. It just, you know, the standard of living compared to when people bought their houses, I guess in good faith, thinking that, you know, they were free to at least trim trees and that type of thing. To take that ability to away, unless you want to, you know, contract a consultant to go and provide some kind of analysis of biodiversity before you can trim a tree. It just seems a bit over the top. I mean, there's so much area that's publicly held. I just think that, you know, private land should just be excluded, especially residential. I guess the rural and the sort of the wider privately held forestry blocks and all that type of thing are a different issue, but residential, given the size, it seems, you know, I just don't see the point in that. It's not going to make any difference to climate change. I mean, all the people that own those properties, you know, I don't see much development going on. The council's own analysis had said that most of them can't be developed anyway. So it seems like quite an expensive exercise. And I know that the mayor's said that the council has to do it, as I mentioned earlier, but you know, he doesn't have to take 60, 70, 80% of a private person's property, which is what they're doing in some cases, either taking it or stranding it from being used for other purposes. So you also got the loss of value in some cases, where people might have been able to put more houses on that land, and now they can no longer do so. So I think there's going to be issues around people wanting compensation, that type of thing. Also, you know, there's a lot of sort of scrubby natives there that, you know, you wouldn't classify as being areas of national significance, like a national park is. It's you know, whitey woods and karakas and those type of things, which are fairly common. So it's hard to see that that's an area of national significance. Is that 5 minutes?
If you'd just like to wrap up.
Oh yeah, sure. And I just want to make a point. As someone who's been a trade negotiator for quite a few years, I think, you know, I don't know if you looked at the international legal side of this, but New Zealand's subject to a number of FTAs where if you expropriate or indirectly expropriate land, which this is an indirect expropriation, then compensation has to be paid. There are a number of agreements, including Ansford, where there are no exceptions for environmental purposes. So if you get Australians, Singaporeans, anyone from Southeast Asia, then you've got CPTPP and a number of other agreements where you could see ISDS cases, as in the case of Ansford, or High Court legal action in the case of some other agreements. So I don't know if the council's looked into that. So I think that's something they should do. And you know, the council should set up a mechanism to be able to pay people who are foreign investors who own those properties. And even if it's 5 or 10% of those properties, that could run into tens of millions of dollars, I would estimate.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you for those points. Jeff, we'll move on to you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so a recent homeowner, and kind of in line with what Duncan's saying there, my main concerns are around significant natural areas. Keeping it pretty short, but the main issue I have with it is the ability to trim and maintain. I think at the moment the rules should allow for that. And if you don't, I feel like people are going to see these areas as detrimental and potentially remove them and get rid of the natural area that existed there. So this law could actually do more harm than good. I think some really good points around views and sunlight, and we are living in a city. There needs to be a sort of the view of that, and being able to sort of live in a city with these green areas is really important, but the ability to maintain and trim the trees, I think, is a thing that should be added. Yeah, and that's all I have to say, really.
Short and sweet. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep.
Right, so we'll move on to Marilyn. Is Marilyn here? No. Oh, yes, Marilyn. I see you're there now. Would you like to turn your screen on and we'll give you your 5 minutes?
I'm not sure if Marilyn's having a couple of issues.
Okay.
I can see there are 2 Marilyns in the
Yes,
chat.
and one's on mute. I can see that too. Do you want to try and see if you can sort that out, Damien, and we'll move on
Yes,
to...
I'll get in touch with Marilyn.
Okay, thank you very much. So next up, we might actually go to you, Kari, because I can see you here. Oh, and I'd just like to welcome Councillor Young, who's joined us too. Hello, Nicola. And I should have probably said I'm Sarah Free. I'm Deputy Mayor and Eastern Ward Councillor.
Kia ora, Sarah. Kia ora koutou. I'm Kari Biven, and I'm joined here today by Geordie Gartrell as well, who's the Lead Ranger for Infrastructure. We're here from Zealandia, Te Mara Tāne. And I'm also going to be representing the Moriori ki te Kaiwharawhara project, the Sanctuary to Sea project that begins at the headwaters of the Kaiwharawhara catchment and runs down to the sea there as well. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you about it. We wanted to start off by just saying thank you, and we do very much support Tautoko, the approach of recognising the landscape features and looking forward to further restore and enhance the landscape and the special natural features that are here. We've identified a few implications for Te Mara Tāne, for Zealandia. Specifically, they come under several headings, and I've sent you some details about that in writing, but I suppose Zealandia has works to a 500-year vision. And within that 500-year vision, we write restoration plans that are meeting and holding that vision, but meeting their shorter term goals in order to keep stepping progress towards there. They're written under a rigorous process in partnership with our partners, and they go before the board, the Karori Sanctuary Trust Board, for approval before we enact them. We're not, however, subject to the Reserves Act, nor are we subject to the Queen Elizabeth II Trust Act. So where there are some of the rules in the draft version, and I'm just, excuse me, I'm just looking to my notes here. Zealandia is classed in three, a combination of an outstanding natural landscape. Some of the areas are significant natural areas and a natural open space zone. There are some of the rules that allow for works, for example, restoration and maintenance works, if it's carried out in accordance with the Reserves Act or Queen Elizabeth II National Trust Act, which we're not subject to. So much of our restoration work, our conservation work, wouldn't actually be able to take place under this draft plan. What we propose is that there's allowance made within the details of these rules, the special conditions for works that's carried out by Zealandia according to, and I've just lost my specific notes on this, so I'm going to have to make it up as I go, by Zealandia in accordance with restoration plans as approved by the Zealandia Karori Sanctuary Trust Board. And if that was included, then that would allow us to carry out these conservation works. By that, I'm meaning things like, you know, providing for health and safety for our staff. We're looking at things, for example, some of the draft rules cover structures, the building of structures. We've got a fence that's over 20 years old that's playing a vital role in our in the integrity of our biosecurity. There are sections of that, and as we look forward, we may need to replace parts of that fence. And at the moment, under the proposed plan, we won't be able to do that. There are some other situations where we'd like to, where as you walk around the fence, you can see pine trees and other trees that are at risk of falling on the fence. Perhaps they're rotten on a side, or they're on a lean, or they're just in a position that they need to be preemptively removed, or branches removed, and that needs to happen to a greater extent than what's allowed for in the plan. I think the plan allows for 2 to 3 meters either side. But sometimes if you've got a pine tree that's 6 or 7 meters tall, we need to allow for the fall of that. So there are a few specificities that we've sent to you in writing. Do you have that submission with you?
I've had a chance to have a brief look at them all, but I haven't had a really detailed look. So I'm sure that after having heard these, there'll be lots of things we want to go back and actually have a more in-depth look at some of the written submissions.
Great.
Yeah. But
okay,
yes, we do have them. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So that covers things like our conservation work, including some of the weed control, some of the planting and restoration work, buildings and structures, and the removal of some vegetation that's not allowed for within the draft plan at the moment. We're also looking at, there were 2 rules here, one relating to earthworks within special amenity landscapes, and that still has the potential to cause challenges for Zealandia, just for our operations, for our restoration work. Again, when we're looking at the replacement of the fence or biosecurity, potentially when we're looking at opportunities to engage with and education and engagement with the public, if we're wanting to, for example, construct a platform for people to better experience the wetland. There are things that might come up.
So Kari, you have come to the end of your 5 minutes. If you just want to very quickly wrap up, or wait until we have a chance to discuss. Yeah.
In terms of perhaps then, instead of saying any more with that, I'll leave you to read those. And I just wanted to talk quickly to the Kaiwharawhara Catchment Reserve project as well. The project lead on that has left to go do her PhD. So I'm going to be speaking to that as well. The main thing we had on that one was that the Sanctuary to Sea project is a 100-year vision to restore and enhance what is the largest of the a very special and important waterway, the Kaiwharawhara catchment. And so we had some concerns there about the plan, particularly with respect to the size and the siting that's going to be allowed for some of the buildings along the Kaiwharawhara. It's not allowing for further restoration of the catchment itself. We wanted to highlight the infrastructure around stormwater works and sewage and water and requirements and needs there for development works that need to be identified if we're going to look to this partnership vision, which brings in Te Maratane, but also iwi partners, council, businesses, with every business making a difference to further improve this special taonga that is the waterway.
Okay, it's interesting that some of the concerns that you're identifying are actually similar to the private concerns, and I think that we will ask for officer advice when we get to the end of it, the people submitting. Marilyn, are you there now? Thank you for that. Damien, do we have Marilyn available? Oh, I see.
I'm just on the phone with Marilyn right now.
Oh, okay.
I'll let you know if we are able to make it work.
We are happy just to have her talk to us on the phone if she's happy to do that.
I see. Just one moment, please.
Okay. I thought actually it might be a chance to ask our staff member Andrew to respond to some of what we've heard, the concerns at the moment. What we've heard from two residential submitters and an organisational submitter about some of the concerns relating to special amenity landscapes and I think significant natural areas, both sort of overlap a bit in terms of what the restrictions that they might have on just doing work that they need to do to keep things under control or to improve for health and safety or to improve for other reasons. Are you able to make any comment to that?
Perhaps a more general one to start with. This isn't my specific policy area, but it's an area I'm familiar with, obviously, because it's so important. So yeah, as I think some of the submitters understand it, we're following in from the regional policy statement's requirement to identify these areas with significant Indigenous biodiversity values. They've got some criteria, and then to protect those values from inappropriate subdivision use and development. So it's that level of what's inappropriate and what's appropriate that I think we're trying to tease out through this district plan process. And there's going to be things that fall within, yeah, you can just get on and do it, and things like maintenance around buildings, you know, restoration activities, anything to do with natural hazard fire mitigation, that type of thing. And then there's a threshold at which the council would want to say, for this area, let's take a look at it through a resource consent and see what the effects are on biodiversity. And that's when we go back to our overall principles of, first of all, can we protect that biodiversity? If we can't protect it, can we minimize the effects? If we can't minimize the effects, can we have some sort of offset somewhere else on the property or elsewhere, so that, you know, we can enable this development to happen, but also deal with the biodiversity values as part of that development. In saying that, you know, this is still a draft plan, so this is a good time to actually test out those rules and find out what should be permitted, don't need to worry about bureaucracy, and what should fall into an assessment. And I think the submissions that we've been hearing today are good examples of why it's really important to test that out. And of course, just for the submitters who aren't aware, this is obviously the informal part of the process. Once the plan is notified in, I expect it to be around mid-July. If you lodge a submission at that point, then that gives you the right to be heard in front of the independent hearing panel. So there'll be that formal process afterwards. But I'm hoping that we can resolve as much as we can through this process, because it makes life a lot easier to narrow down on the residual points of disagreement. Does that, I
Okay,
hope that
thank you.
helps.
Yeah. Now, Marilyn, how are we going? I can
So
see you, which is looking good.
I have Marilyn on the phone. I'm going to try putting Marilyn on speakerphone and hopefully it will come
Okay.
with my audio.
Okay.
We'll just try that. 1 second. Okay, Marilyn, if you'd like to try talking. Can we hear?
All right. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, my big concern has been that the City Council hasn't thought through any of these ideas. They have just foisted them on to the citizens, the ratepayers, and put the ratepayers in a state of fear for their quality of life, for their communities, for the lives that they've built up, for their assets that they've worked to achieve, yeah, for their whole culture. And the City Council hasn't done any background work, and it's made the citizens have to go and be city planners themselves. I've walked around all the streets of Thorndon where I live. I mean, that's fine. I've enjoyed doing that. But I've deliberately walked around and you know, just looked at every property just to get a better idea of what's there. And it's so silly that the City Council and the staff haven't actually looked at it street by street or property by property. They've just said, okay, you can just have a 6-story plus building any old where, you know, too bad about that and too bad about anyone else's quality of life. And then Selwyn Terrace and Hobson Street, the City Council seems to think, oh well, let's just make those central cities. We'll just tidy up that pocket. Well, these streets are not just pockets, and if they appear that way to you, that's because in the past a motorway has been put through. Well, and then those who are on the wrong side of the motorway are to be punished and called a pocket. Well, it's very sad to put such fear into people, fear for their way of life.
Marilyn, I understand that you are particularly concerned about Hobson Precinct and Selwyn Terrace being included in the CBD height limits, and you also made a point. Oh. Can you hear me? Okay. Just for the benefit of other people who are on the chat room, I know your main point is about the height limits in Thorndon, especially areas like Hobson Precinct and Selwyn Terrace, and you had something you wanted to say too about the connection between the Catherine Mansfield House and the I think it's a walkway. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yes, we can hear you on the phone.
Are we still on the phone?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can hear you.
Oh, all right. Okay, that's good. Well, yes, it is rather ironical that the City Council's eyesight pamphlet suggests the way for a tourist to Wellington to go from downtown Wellington or the station or Botanic, no, not necessarily Botanic Gardens, but to one of the tourist attractions, Catherine Mansfield House, is via Hobson Street, and the publication has lots of icons of historic house facades along both sides of it to indicate that is the route for a tourist to take. And now we have this proposed plan where, too bad about any of that, just roll it down, knock down all the wooden houses, whatever, and put concrete high rises. Too bad about any cultural amenity or tourist attraction. Yeah, there's some strange ideology going on in the City Council. Perhaps someone could explain it. Why is it this idea of equity that if anybody has a house, well, they they shouldn't be allowed because not everybody's got the house. Is this what the ideology is, that people are to be punished for having a house?
Okay, well, thank you. I think that's been useful to hear from you, and thank you for trying to communicate with us. we've managed to sort of patch together, and I think we've heard your points, so that's been really good. What we're doing now, I think we've heard from everybody, is we actually have the opportunity to ask questions of the officers. Councillors can ask questions. You can ask questions of each other. If you want to just put your hand up, I'll sort of let you know when it's your turn. So we'll hand over, I think, I see Councillor Calvert's going to start us off.
I am, and I'm just going to make a comment. And this is around the significant natural areas. I find it interesting that this council wants to spend an extra $4 million, or whatever it is, over the next 10 years on planting more trees, and yet we can't compensate landowners for their trees and their conservation. So just making that little comment.
Okay. Are there any other comments? Andrew, has there been any? I just wanted to raise the issue of the agreements, the international agreements that might protect private property rights, or other agreements that might protect private property rights. How much thinking has the council done about that?
International agreements protecting private property rights.
This was raised by Duncan.
Right. Well, I mean, I can't comment on a specific agreement, obviously. In general, in New Zealand, these international agreements are given effect through legislation. In this case, currently the Resource Management Act, which then sets regulation at a regional level, which then also directs us at a district level. So we tend to follow that hierarchy and refer back to our regional and national level. And tend not to look at an international level unless it's having specific jurisdiction at a land use controls level. So I mean, I'm not saying that's incorrect, because there may well be some international agreement there that I'm not aware of, but that's the general approach for land use controls.
Okay, Councillor, thank you for that, Andrew. Put you on the spot a bit, but thank you. I think it's something I'd like to know a little bit more about, certainly, but we probably can't do that right now, but maybe we can discuss it a bit more at another forum. Councillor Foon.
I think I'd know how to do that by now. My question is for Kari, and thank you so much for coming in, and Geordie as well. I wasn't super clear on the point you wanted to make on what we needed to change around the sanctuary to see all the Kaiwharawhara catchment. Could you just explain that again, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Foon. Absolutely. So the concerns that were raised with me or through the submission for the Kaiwharawhara catchment was, let's see, I'm just getting down to get my wording a bit more clear. The central goal of the Sanctuary to Sea project is to support resilient ecosystems within the pressures that have been in the past and are continuing to be from human development, as well as from climate change, so that we can further enhance a nature-rich city. The Kaiwharawhara catchment is an example of, you know, a place with special values. It's a forested corridor connecting directly from the mountains to the sea. So the concerns that were raised were that the spatial plan, as it's currently presented in the draft plan, is going to sorry, hang on, let me just go back. Is going to contribute to New Zealand's decline in biodiversity still, with some of the planning that's being undertaken from the perspective of human population, economic growth, transport corridors, that planning is going to lead to direct negative effects on the natural areas of that region. So ultimately, that's going to contribute to us failing to meet some of these commitments under the Convention of Biological Diversity. There's no indication at the moment in the plans that developments such as, 6-storey developments through Kandala will be done in a way that eliminates the potential impacts on this waterway.
In case.
Oh, sorry. So we're asking that, should development for population growth occur, that the following mitigations need to occur. So minimizing the development required to cater to the population growth, ensuring the proximity of that development doesn't undermine the condition of the natural regenerated forest areas, particularly impacting the waterways through development. So, establishing minimum distances by establishing, say, water sensitive approaches to design and development. We're not looking, with the Kaiwharawhara catchment, we're not looking at stormwater neutral as a goal. We're not wanting to hold the status quo. It's a project that's looking to significantly enhance this asset. Iwi are looking to recognise personhood for the Kaiwharawhara catchment. And so, upholding the values and the contributions that this catchment provides for us in Wellington. So we're asking to actively seek to enhance this natural asset through the process of urban growth. For example, improving re-engineering structure, like fish passages and barriers around roads, green walls and green roofs, and other strategies that can be identified that reduce the impact of development on these areas of high biodiversity value. Improving the recreation value of the open spaces through the rules that you're creating, perhaps. Ensuring minimum distance and minimum area access for each household, such as that found in other cities across the world, Melbourne, Brisbane. There are some great examples of those kinds of rules there.
Okay, Carrie, I think we are getting quite into the detail, but I just wonder if you could maybe make 1 or 2 last points, because I can see some other hands up too.
Okay, sure. So I guess what our recommendation is working with experts on stormwater, water quality, freshwater ecology, to identify the improvements in approaches that can be made there. And particularly when you're looking at that, at the allowance for buildings, stormwater, treatment of sewage, and considering not just trying to neutralise but enhance this natural area, and recognising the mahi and the kaupapa that sits around this catchment area.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. I'll check in with you offline.
Yeah, because it sounds like there's there's a lot to consider. Duncan.
Absolutely, I'm quite happy to send you a number, and I'm working from the Home Office today, so I'm quite happy for a phone call if you like.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thanks very much. Oh yeah, just going back to the international agreement. So I mean, when an agreement is signed, before it comes into force, some acts will need to be amended, like especially around customs, and some other legislation. But once it's come into force, that doesn't mean the New Zealand government can do anything at once with you can't just make legislation or use existing legislation to then say, oh, we're just going to do this, and then ignore the international implications. So if you look at Chapter 11 of the Ancillary Agreement, which is Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN, this is the investment chapter. And I'll say I'm not an investment specialist, but this one doesn't seem to have any exceptions for environmental changes or anything like that. And even if it did, you still have to look at compensation. So ANZFID is not saying you can't do this or you can't do that, but if you do it, you still have to provide compensation. And it says to do so without delay, although it does allow for the administration to be set up for that compensation to be paid. So this is not a straightforward type of deal. I mean, there might be other advice that's being provided, but it does cover national and local level government as well.
Can I ask a question? And I guess it's two questions really, and I'd like to ask both Jeffrey and you, Duncan. What do you think would be fair, and do you think Wellingtonians generally know enough about what's going on with these restrictions that have been put on some properties? I'll ask maybe I'll ask Jeff to go first.
Yeah, cool. I think the fair thing from my perspective is I actually don't have a problem with these significant natural areas being established, and I think it's great that our city has so many green spaces. But I think a fair thing would be for the ability for landowners to actually trim and maintain the significant natural area. It's not necessarily doing any harm to it. It's that the rules at the moment, I think, are too strict and don't allow for the ability to maintain and trim these areas which are falling within a city. And that would allow things for trimming for purposes of the view or for allowing sunlight in, those sorts of things. And to answer the question around whether Wellingtonians are aware of it, I don't think many are unless it's directly affecting them right now. And that's just through my circles. So I can't speak too wider, but yeah, those would be my answers.
Thank you, Jeff. And Duncan, just the same questions to you.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I guess I disagree in general, although I can see what the council's trying to do, but I think on private property, given these are existing properties, I think it seems a bit unfair. I think if this didn't cover residential properties, you'd see that much of a change, but it would, as Jeffrey said, at least allow some maintenance. But there might be people who've been planning to think, oh, I'm going to put another house or another building on there at some stage. I mean, that might be possible, although, you know, a lot of the topography doesn't allow for that. I think in terms of the understanding, I mean, it's only affecting 1,700 people, so it's kind of easy to not worry about them. I think there is probably a bit of quite a good understanding among people who own those properties, but I think in general, if you're not impacted, a lot of people probably won't care. So I don't know, but I mean, you know, there are petitions out there. I noticed the ACT Party have said that they will unwind it if this kind of thing goes through. So I kind of think this might be one of those bits of legislation that changes with the government. So, you know, it could be quite a bit of effort for not much gain in the long term if it affects private property. So yeah, but I think the main concern in the short term, at least, is being able to at least trim and maintain trees. It's quite a big issue. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else anyone else wants to say? Okay, I just have one. Oh, okay, Diane, Councillor Calvert.
I'll just ask one question, and that really is about the intensity of the development. And I actually I have a stream that goes down the back of my property, which, you know, in Kandala, which feeds into actually up to Naronga. But what we're seeing, and what I'm hearing also from residents in Naio, is with intensification, they're seeing an increase in the stormwater going into the streams. And I know there are some mitigations that will be happening about that. But just wondering, you know, with the intensification, how do we keep our streams so they still have, or they can get wildlife back into them, and we can see that traveling safely through to the ocean? Maybe Carrie's got a view on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Calvert. That's central to some of the conversations that we're having as well, about how we can provide safe passage for some of that wildlife, and it's multifaceted. So a lot of it is looking at what's being washed into those streams. So as you know, as well as the things you can't see, even the rubbish and things, and people are working together to clear that off, because that's one of the realities of having that extra runoff. Having native plants specific to those catchment areas around the catchment is important as well. And structures that allow the passage of ika and tuna and korua, other aquatic species up and down the stream are quite important too, as well as recognising where the stream goes and lifting the profile of it with people so that there's more experience of it, more care. There are a number of things that can be done with building works. So avoiding the impacts of that runoff is quite important. And there are some good examples of ways in which that's been done in other cities as well. But particularly looking at green building approaches, looking at stormwater, the works associated with that stormwater, because that's exactly right. That extra building is creating more surface area for that runoff. But yes, looking at fish passages, looking at plantings around that area, looking at raising the profile and removing rubbish and things from the area, and then specifically the way in which this infrastructure is being built, and then also just looking at ways of focusing on population growth, but in a sustainable, in a way that doesn't increase the impact on this stream.
Thank you. Thanks, Kari. We've got one from Councillor Foon.
Mine's just administrative. I couldn't find the Zealandia submission. So I'm wondering, Carrie, if you could send it through to the Democracy Services team and they'll fire it through. Thank you. And,
yes, absolutely.
There are thousands of them, so don't be offended.
Not offended at all. The Democracy Services, I've got the email I had came from Heidi. Would I send it via her? Is there a specific email someone can send me to send it?
If you have Heidi's email already, that would probably be the easiest.
Okay, I'll send it with attention.
And actually, I've just had a look at my notes, and Duncan, I didn't have a page reference for you, so I don't know if the staff have got yours either. Yeah, but it may be just that it is there and they haven't. It's an omission on our run sheet, but maybe send it through again. Yeah, I'm sure it's there somewhere in the system.
Yeah, I had it sent back to me with the full text, so I'll resend it to Heidi.
If you just wanted to resend it, and it can be circulated to us so that we can make sure we've seen the written copy of what you've presented to us verbally. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other last thoughts? Nicola, did you have anything, feedback or questions?
No, other than as an inner city resident, I find the information about the SNAs really interesting because I'm on a steep learning curve about them. I mean, they don't have much application for people who live in a very congested central city, but they're really essential to our city. So thank you very much for the information about those in particular, and everything else, those in particular.
Yeah, I was interested in some of the things that you raised about Zealandia, Kari, that, some of the ways in which what we're planning to do might be problematic. And then hearing, that, I think there are concerns from residents about just maintaining their sections, what sort of structures they might need to be able to put in to actually do that. And I think that there is a lot more detail that we need to work through to make sure that people don't feel this is just a huge imposition. And takes away a lot of value from their living arrangements. Yeah.
And I think if I can say from a Zealandia point of view, most of what is in there, we can see the merit of it, and a lot of ours would be completely mitigated if there was just a clause that allows for the work, that under Zealandia's restoration plan, as approved by the Sanctuary Trust Board. Because it would bring us in line with being like conservation estate, like QE2 trust covenant. It's just that there is no covenant on this Zealandia land, but everything that's allowed through those clauses would virtually, that would cover us. So we're in support of the work that you're doing. We just would like the Zealandia restoration plan allowed for within the special conditions.
Okay, that might bring us to the end of our session. I see Councillor Flynn still has a hand up, but it might be historical. Is there anything any of our submitters would like to add? I think we might have lost Marilyn, sadly, but her points were noted. Is there anything else anyone wants to add as a last point? No?
Geordie, did you have anything you wanted to add to what I've said?
No, I think that's, hi everybody, sorry, Geordie speaking. I think that's covered everything pretty much. It's exactly as Kari said. Some of the work, sorry, I hope this is not echoing too much.
No,
some of the work would, some of the rules would just affect the way that we work and affect the way that we're able to work in the future. And if we had to go through processes which will always take a long time because they just do, we wouldn't actually be able to do them in time, where they suddenly become a much bigger problem and then there'd be a much longer process, that sort of thing. That's just our main concern from my side. Is we're never going to be at this situation where we're bulldozing a forest. Everything that we do is in line with what the board says we're allowed to do. So we're never doing really hectic things. If there were ever to be a thing like that, there would be a massive process involved beforehand.
All right, well, I'm going to thank everybody who's turned up and given us the benefit of their feedback very much. Thank you. And thank you to my councillor colleagues for their time as well. It's been very useful. I have made copious notes and I'm sure that our staff have been also taking note, and we will have a chance to further discuss this at some point. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. As I said, I'm the Deputy Mayor, I'm chairing the meeting. It's really good to see you all. We've got a pretty full program. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 7 people that are giving us their submission today. We will stick pretty tightly to the 5-minute time limit, and I will say it goes by really, really quickly. So if you see me put my hand up or interrupt, I'm not trying to be rude, I just need to keep things moving. And that's because we'll have a general discussion afterwards, which we usually find is very informative and valuable. So we do want to allow enough time for that. So starting us off today, I'll just say that I've got Councillor Foon, Councillor Young, and expecting to have Councillor Calvert with us at some point. And of course, Scott staff and hopefully someone from, I can't see them at the minute, but there's usually someone who can actually help out too with technical questions if we don't know the answers as councillors. So that might be you, Sarah, is it? Yes, okay, thank you. Right, so we're going to start off with Carol, then move to Colin, then Julie, then Rona, Judith and Bruce. So we'll start with you, Carol, and you've got 5 minutes. Welcome. Have we got Carol? Yes.
Hello, can you?
We can hear you but not see you, but that's fine.
We'd rather see you, Carol.
Actually, we can't hear you now. You're muted. Carol, do you want us to give you a few minutes and we can come back?
Sorry.
Oh.
I've unmuted, I think.
Yes, we can hear you again.
I do apologise. Now I can't see any of you, which is really weird. I don't know why that's happened. I don't know why I always have trouble with Zoom. I just
You might need to speak up a bit too, because you are quite faint.
Okay, sorry. Okay, hang on. I just think I can get the video down here. Right. Okay, all good. Sorry about that, guys. So my main points are sunlight. I think sunlight is incredibly important for everyone and for buildings to keep them warm and, you know, not rotting. And I think sunlight is incredibly important for mental health too, and people just need it. And also you need it for, you know, if you're going to have solar panels or all those sorts of things, and to dry your washing, just lots of things, you know, so that's that. Another thing I think is very important in apartments or multi-level buildings is to have some provision for emergency water storage, because I've been told by people who live in apartments that they're not allowed water tanks on their balconies because they're too heavy, And so therefore they don't want a lot of little bottles around their small lounge room. So I think there needs to be something maybe in the basement or somewhere. I'm not sure if it's been thought of. Well, it must have been thought of, but I'm not sure what the resolution is to that, but I think it's very important. I also think in large buildings, it's really a good idea to have some communal space, because without a communal space where people can go because they deliberately want to meet people, they only meet each other and look away, you know, at the lift or at the front door. And, you know, we don't want that kind of culture. I think we need to encourage a community focused culture. And I also think in the heritage areas, rather than put blanket blobs of colour on the maps saying the buildings can be this big, you know, they need to be sympathetically built in with what's there. There are plenty in our hilly town, there are plenty of places near hillsides where big buildings can sit nicely. But I just think if you try and mix them in, I really think it's going to be a disaster. I mean, I know we need more people, but we just need to be clever about it instead of trying to be quick about it. So, yes, I think that's my main point. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That was really succinct. And yeah, thank you for reinforcing what you said in your written submission. That's useful. Right, so I'm going to go to Colin Fraser. You might need to mute, Colin. Unmute.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you. I thought I had. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And on the whole, we think the council is doing a really great job steering us through a really complex process. And back in December, all I really did was put up my hand and wave it. I think I did about 2 pages in my written submission. I've since been doing quite a bit of work with the assistance of other people that are involved with the same sort of kaupapa as I am. And I now have about 8 or 10 pages that I'd like to pass through at some stage. Bearing in mind that there's going to be a skim reading going on. What I'm trying to represent, and I hope successfully, is a number of groups or several groups and individuals that are really concerned about the whole mental health and addiction / criminal justice issue. What the substance of those groups and individuals are concerned with is that whilst that housing and building assessment or housing and building capacity assessment is a good start, it doesn't get into the level of detail that we would be hoping local authorities will eventually undertake. What I'm referring to there is what is expected of councils in terms of the National Policy Statement, Urban Development 220, and in particular clause 3.23, which sets out the groups that the writers, the politicians wanted to see represented in terms of meeting housing need and the type and form of accommodation that would be provided. That's the first thing, and I'll elaborate on that a wee bit later. The other thing is my concern that this addiction, which some government agents seem to have to market failure, to market processes, just so often highlights market failures. Given that, the voice of the people I'm trying to represent would want to support option 4 of those options for assisted housing that have been elaborated, and put the funding from financial contributions into the hands of the council to actually meet the real needs of a fair cross-section of diverse lower income earners, the elderly, some sectors of Maori, and so forth. Given this concern that we're focused on mental health and addiction and criminal justice issues, which are related, and Healthy Start, was it 90% of people in prison have got some sort of mental illness, we're told on good authority. And mental illness, as I think it was Carol indicated, starts with a need to keep the city as green as possible and to avoid unnecessary high rise, because that cuts out the sunlight. I'm conscious that what was it called, the medium density regional density residential statement came out after the planning for growth process is well underway, and that on the whole we think is good. It's going to make far more opportunity for higher rise buildings and denser accommodation right throughout most residential areas. And we wonder whether that, given that, there's a need for 9-storey buildings in parts of Kilburnie and Johnsonville. I forget what the zoning description is, as was being suggested. We're very conscious that this plan goes for 30 years, and although it gets updated supposedly every 10 years, it's going to be informed by various monitoring regimes. There may not be a need to have such high-rise buildings cutting out sunlight and general amenity value right at the start, or some early process when somebody decides it's cheaper.
So Colin, you have had your 5 minutes. Do you want to just quickly wrap up?
Yep. Policy is evolving, especially in the health and the criminal justice areas, as led by central government. And we would want to see the council having open a mind towards having health facilities which meet that need, and rehabilitations meet the health need, and the rehabilitation centres that meet the criminal justice needs. And we'd like to see the definition of, I think it's a community facility and healthcare facility, providing for that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Julie.
Rushed.
I know, it's always been so rushed.
Okay, hi. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, just as a little bit of background, so I'm a retired home educator. I'm a mother of 3. I'm 60 years old, and I've lived for 32 years in Wellington, always first as a renter in Ngaio and then later as a homeowner in Kandala. I've lived in my current home for 27 years, and it was quite a rundown house when we bought it. We've gradually upgraded it to modern standards. We are now zoned to be able to have a 6-storey building land up straight in front of all of our northern aspect, within, say, 3 metres of all our north-facing windows. I'm a gardener. And if I want my garden to grow and thrive, then I need to take into account the climate, the soil, the aspect of my particular environment in order to get the best out of the land that I've got. I think of the councillors as being gardeners whose role it is to try and get the best out of the natural endowments and what has gone before in our city. I'm coming to this with a strong sense of love and attachment to my home, my street, my suburb and my city. And our city is not Christchurch with endless plains, it's not Auckland with its isthmus, and I feel that the one-size-fits-all policy statements is allowing the council to avoid thinking hard and consulting widely and working with the community to create a growth framework for the city which will fairly take into account the interests of the current and future residents. I don't want to impose solutions on other suburbs, but I am really concerned that the proposals for 6-storey apartments in Kandala is wrong and will potentially make our area more congested, push our public transport and other infrastructure beyond capacity. And I've read the submission of the Tyres Road Facebook group, and I was quite dismayed to read yet again that the existing Three Waters infrastructure in the stream's catchment area has suffered from lack of maintenance and renewals, that it shows signs of significant failure, and that it's causing ongoing significant water and air contamination, erosion events, and other problems in the Tyres stream. I support that group submission in its entirety, and I likewise consider that all development and intensification in the catchment should be delayed until significant upgrading of the Three Waters capacity is ensured and put in place. Sewage storage tanks and new developments does not seem to me to be an acceptable solution. The changes proposed for Kandala are based on the assertion that the Johnsonville branch line amounts to mass rapid transit. Just because you keep saying that it's rapid transit doesn't make it so. And it's disappointing that there's been no statistical analysis or projections by the council about the Johnsonville train. Even before COVID in 2018-19, patronage on the Johnsonville line declined by 5%, while patronage on all other rail services and buses in the region increased by between 2 and 4%. There used to be a game on Sesame Street. I don't know if people will remember it, but it was one of these things that's not like the other. And I think that it applies to the Johnsonville line. It's not like the Hutt Valley line. It's not like the Kapiti line. It has slower, less frequent, smaller trains, and it can't realistically be expanded. It can justifiably be treated different from these other services, and it compares unfavourably on almost all measures with bus services in the same catchment. Finally, to reinforce what Carol said, I'd like to talk about sunlight access. The draft district plan says that maximising solar gain is an important priority in new subdivisions. That's a laudable and sensible goal for all of the reasons that Carol's already set out. My concern is that that goal should be extended to all developments and redevelopments anywhere in the city. The effect on shading on neighbouring properties in Wellington is just so important. And in the case of Kandala, even a small number of 6-storey buildings on the valley floor, which are likely to yield very few apartments, is going to have such a major adverse effect on dozens of houses that are uphill from those tower blocks. The benefits to the community seem to me to be out of all proportion to the costs, and I'm asking the council to reconsider, especially in light of the fact that now there is potential, as Colin has mentioned, for medium density 3-storey development everywhere in the city, which was not the case when the draft district plan was being formulated.
Thank you. You've used your 5 minutes very well. It's very well timed. Thank you, Julie. Those points are noted. So we'll move now to Rona. Rona, welcome.
Hi, I'm here as president of the Newtown Residents Association. I've tried to do a summary of our submission or the main points and hope I can get it within 5 minutes. But just a heads up that the sort of point that I want to introduce that maybe hasn't been a big part of the discussions is a request for the council to make more, to explore more widely about the possible use of qualifying matters to modify the blanket upzoning of the NPSUD. But for the Newtown specific situation, we're enthusiastic about having additional good quality and affordable housing, but we do strongly disagree with the current proposals for allowing 6-storey developments scattered across most of the residential streets, which are primarily narrow streets of 1- and 2-storey houses. We've got the same concerns about that as Julie does. We have an alternative vision, which most councillors at any rate have heard about, for a proposal for high-rise in the Newtown Suburban Centre. We've had this carefully mapped out so that it protects the heritage values of the old shops, but has apartment blocks behind them, or as additions to currently underused sites with commercial and retail on the ground floor and housing above. And we can demonstrate the proposal for housing 2,000 or more people in this way. But our vision for the proposal is that it's accepted and zoned instead of high-rise in the residential streets, not as well as. And unfortunately, the NPS UD, with prescriptions for enabling 6-storey developments within the walkable distance of city centres and mass transit routes, doesn't easily allow for such initiatives. And I'd just like to point out that since the spatial plan was developed based on the NPSUD, there's been a subsequent government policy statement on housing and urban development, which has a very different approach. It says we will take a place-based approach. Every community has their own housing and urban development challenges and opportunities, and a one-size-fits-all approach will not work to address them. This is because every place is unique with different characteristics, including challenges or problems arising from local history, culture and heritage, geography, economy and resources. Now, this is an approach that we wish it could be introduced. It didn't make it into the sort of governmental requirements for either the NPSUD or the new developments and backyards legislation. But I think it's a good guide for developing good, thriving communities. The only potential within the NPSUD for adjustment to local conditions is the allowance for qualifying matters to modify the plan for cut zoning requirements. And unfortunately, Wellington City Council have had very little interest in exploring this widely. In fact, you've even gone out of your way to increase the extent of the zone subject to the NPSUD by increasing the walkable catchment. The one avenue that has been allowed is in the designation of some character areas, but of course, even this was significantly reduced when the councillors voted on the plan. But we also ask that the damaging environmental effects of high-rise developments should be considered a qualifying matter for modifying building types and encouraging retention and adaptation of existing housing stock under NPSUD clause 3.31H. And reducing emissions and protecting against climate change is meant to be one of the purposes of the NPSUD, but the consideration of this is limited to rules that encourage people to use public transport. There are also environmental effects associated with demolition and rebuilding. New building, particularly high-rise, is very carbon intensive. On the other hand, our old houses, built of existing native timbers, represent a great deal of embodied energy and sequestered carbon.
Rona, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Okay, that's it essentially.
Okay.
It goes on to talk about sunlight and the importance for a carbon zero lifestyle, but you know, we heard the same thing from Carol and Julie, so
okay,
proposing that.
Okay, thank you very much. And those are points are noted. Now we've got Judith and then Bruce, and are they both online? Just trying to see.
Hello.
Yes, good. Right, Judith, it's your turn to have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Right, well, it's been very interesting hearing other people and what they have to say. I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody from Thornton, and
I think we ignore that.
Okay. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I think, you know, eventually overseas visitors will return and they don't want to see what they can see at home. They want to see something different. And Thornton certainly has it. And they certainly come into the area because they go to Old St. Paul's, they go to Catherine Mansfield, they come up towards the gardens. And so this is a prime site that people from overseas come to visit. I think it's the continuity of the streetscape. There's nothing uglier than a building that's been put in the wrong place. Might be a beautiful building, but in the wrong place, it just doesn't fit. And I think that's a tragedy. I've not got a lot to say. I do think that the Wellington City Council is pretty forward-looking. After all, you did help the development of Zealandia. And lots of people go through Thorndon to get to Zealandia. But I think that we should be proactive in retaining the areas rather than reactive to this. We must build more, we must build more. You're never going to get cheaper housing in Thorndon. The only way to make it cheap is to build cheap. And that just looks awful. And I think that, you know, if we were a council-driven quality development rather than the developers, so if we put out, you know, go out and say, you know, let's see who can bring up the most innovative, greater density, not high density, buildings that will become tomorrow's heritage buildings, rather than mess up what we have today in heritage, develop tomorrow's heritage. We have some fabulous architects. Let them go ahead and do some fabulous architecture that people will enjoy living in. So all those points about sunshine and community, etc., need to be part of that development, not just a plonk here and a plonk there, done by developers who are only in it to make money. So that's basically all I have to say. So I'm inside my time.
Thank you, Judith. Yes, you are you are a little bit, which is will allow us more time for discussion, which is actually really profitable too.
Yeah.
Thank you for your points. They're noted. Right, lucky last is Bruce. Thank you, Bruce. And you
Thank
have
you.
5 minutes. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you all. Thank you all for meeting with us, and thank you, Judith, for introducing Thorndon. I'm here for the Thorndon Society, and the Thorndon Society's objectives are to retain the residential and heritage character of Thorndon. In our submission, we mentioned that our prime concern with the residents is the proposal to rezone a central city all the remaining residential land on the city side of the motorway. That includes streets such as Hobson Street and Selwyn Terrace, all of which are residential streets now. Expanding the city to those streets may actually reduce housing in Wellington with commercial buildings and reduce the number of people that are actually able to be housed there. We believe that we all want to retain Wellington as a compact, vibrant city, and that to do that, we need increased residential growth within the city, and we need to stop land use change and commercial use in the surrounding suburbs. And that includes those areas such as Hobson Street, Selwyn Terrace, and even the railway land. Because if the city moves through to those areas, it's going to dissipate the city. In terms of heritage, and as discussed by Judith, we're aware that the council has discussed character and heritage, but we believe it has not appreciated that Thorndon is a heritage area of value to Wellington and to New Zealand, and that the council should be trying to protect it. The current plan does not do that. We need a strengthened demolition rule to ensure the demolition of heritage buildings is not done lightly, and that multi-unit buildings do not surround our character buildings. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. That's very good. You were within time too. Thank you. But made some good points, and they're all noted. All right. Well, we're open to discussion, and I see that Councillor Young has her hand up. But it's an opportunity actually for people to ask questions of anybody, our officers or other participants, or of councillors. So, or just points of clarification. So, Nicola, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's good to see so many inner city residents here. Thank you, especially to Thorndon, because, and of course, Carol Comber. But just thinking about Thorndon, Is it true that it's New Zealand's most densely populated area, or suburb, I should say? You know, I'm forgetting about inner city where you have apartments, but of all the suburbs, that Thorndon is the most densely populated. Do you know if that's true, Bruce?
It certainly was true. I don't know whether it's true now. Remember, Thorndon has a lot of very small properties. It is dense. The ability to be able to subdivide in Thorndon is extremely restricted. If you walk up some of those little lanes like Poplar Avenue, you'll see that it's not quite the same as in England, where you've got terrace buildings, but it's little cottage right next to little cottage, and they're all very small.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I mean, I do think it's a very precious area of our country and needs to be preserved, but I am but one vote.
Thank you.
I guess by the way, feel free to put your hand up either with the icon or just physically put your hand up if you would like to have a say. I guess my challenge is, if we did want to grow the city, and even if you dispute the number, we're definitely going to have to grow the city somehow. How would people suggest that we accommodate those challenges of trying to retain heritage, of trying to make sure we've got green space, trying to make sure we've got places for our community, for our business community? How would we keep the heritage and try to do all of those things? Because I think I'm very sympathetic to keeping heritage. I just can see a challenge, a natural tension there. So I'm interested in people's ideas on that. Councillor Calvert, did you have a point to make there, or did you have something else to say? I'll go to you and then to Carol.
No, I have a question, so perhaps you deal with your question and answer first.
Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Free. I really support what Newtown has done in that they have taken a localised look at the area, and it's a more intense look than the helicopter view that the councillors are going to have to take in the time that they have to make these plans. But I think there's a lot to be said for doing that, because as it is now, we have developers who come along, nab a bit of land, nab a few bits next door, and they just build whatever they want as quick as they want. And I don't think they take that approach of this is going to be here for 100 years. Yeah, so that would be my suggestion, would be a more localized approaches.
Okay. And I think there's probably a bit of support there in this current forum. Julie, I'll go to you because you probably got something to add, and then we'll go back to Councillor Calvert.
Yes, I just agree with what Carol has just said, that it's a more nuanced approach, that there probably are places within Kandala where you could build 6-storey buildings. They may be slightly further away from the railway line, but then on the other hand, with an ageing population, access to the train is probably not a really important factor for a lot of people that live in this area, that they would probably prefer to be able to relocate to something smaller, but still be within their suburb. So I think we could be more nuanced, that we can still provide more housing, but it's just plonking it along the valley floor by drawing a purple line, colouring in purple, isn't really the right way to go.
Do you think, just pursuing this a little bit more, do you think that we've considered the needs of people who are limited with their mobility and ageing enough in this district plan?
I actually don't think we have, because a lot of if you look at the 3-storey developments that have been happening prior to the plan and which seem to be being encouraged, the thing that really concerns me about them is that they're often garage on the bottom, perhaps, and with no bedroom or toilet, that you've then got a living area which often also doesn't even have a toilet, and so your bathroom is on the 3rd level. Now, for people that are aging, that's just not an attractive option. And to have grandma come to visit and say, well, you can have a cup of tea in the garage because you can't access the rest of the house, really doesn't seem a great idea. The other thing, looking at Kandala, is that if we were to build apartment buildings along the railway line, when you've got retired people who are going to live there pretty much 24/7, I don't think that becoming the triplets of Belleville and having the train rattling past you every half hour is really terribly attractive.
Thank you for that view. Right, well, back to you, Councillor Calvert.
Sarah, can I comment first?
Yeah, sure.
I think there are two aspects to consider in answering your question. One is that the greenfield sites will always be the most desirable for developers, where you can get probably the largest accommodation. The big area in Wellington, of course, is the railway land. It's convenient to the city, it's close, you could have high rises there, you could have apartments. If you have apartments and they have lifts, and if the lifts work, then people will have access. I think one of the other aspects that, and I was just listening to Julie, is the whole aspect of retirement villages. And I don't know whether that's really been thought through very well. I am just aware, though, that where you have a new retirement village, such as the one which is about Tobin and Churton Park, that you have a lot of Wellingtonians actually leaving their much larger homes to move into retirement apartments. And that actually generates a lot of churn, which will open up accommodation to other people.
It's good, a good thing to think about, I think, because the demographics are certainly towards an ageing population. So I think forward focus must be a little bit on that. Right, back to Diane. Thank you, Councillor Calvert.
Thank you. I've got two questions, and it follows on really from Rona, and I think, Sarah, your question. But I know one of the proposals that we had is that suburbs or neighbourhoods, or how you want to define them, would have some say in developing up a neighbourhood plan in terms of, because often the people living in an area know where sites are for development, because they understand the topography, they understand their services, and I know that's something that this council has in progress, but just really interested to get people's views on that. And then the other question is do you think how well do you think the extent of this district plan is known by the majority of Wellingtonians? So two parts to that.
Okay.
I think it could have been better. Could have been better.
Okay. And Colin, you had something to say.
Yeah, I just
and then we'll move on.
Rona's saying I don't think that the implications of the current proposal for Kilbirnie Lower Bay area are generally well known and out this way.
Okay. All right. So, and Judith, is this on this topic or is it a new one? Yeah. Okay. We'll
This
go
topic.
to this topic. Okay.
On this topic, for the community to help develop some guidelines for development. It would be really good if the City Council gave us guidelines as to how to set it out, so they want to know what they want, and for us to know that it's more than just lip service, so that actually does have an impact on what happens, rather than tick the box, done that, now we'll carry on.
Okay, that's useful. Okay, right, Councillor Young.
So this is really a question for Rona. Just thinking about the relatively new development directly opposite the Newtown Library. Are they townhouses or apartments? They've got that slightly kind of faux Brittany look about them. How successful have they been? Because it seems to me that that's a very good development. I mean, it's not entirely my cup of tea, but it looks like quite a good development. You're mute.
Sorry, yeah. I think it is a reasonably good development. It's got green space in the middle of it. There's a drawback in that it's not very accessible, in that, there's no lifts.
So is each apartment, are they all one floor? Or
I couldn't be sure, to be honest. I haven't done it. I've been on the outside areas in the courtyard, but I haven't actually been in. But I think they are, it's a 4-story thing. I think there's probably different apartments on different floors, but I couldn't swear to that. But that's within the suburban centre. And so that was possible within the existing rules. We didn't need to have any plan changes for it. But it's the sort of thing that we'd be happy to encourage in other parts of the suburban centre in particular.
I wouldn't want to live on the 4th floor.
No, the more accessible and the more, the better.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm just wondering if Councillor Foon, you've been quiet this session, if you've got something you wanted to say or a question you wanted to ask. And if you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, I think that I really hear all of you, and I really thank you for bringing your comments today. But I think equally we are hearing from people that really can't afford to live anywhere in Wellington and can't find anywhere to live. And many of those that are flatting are in quite substandard conditions. And I guess it forced us as council to go beyond what we might have normally done to see some change. So my question to all of you is what would you do to help this situation, which is actually becoming a crisis? Thank you, Julie.
Challenge. All right, Julie.
So in my submission, I did point out that according to the census data, that we've actually got almost 60% of our population who have more bedrooms than they need. So part of the problem is that the people that have got more bedrooms than they need haven't really got anywhere to move to. And so although building new looks like the best solution, as Bruce has said, looking at how we can get more churn is probably equally important.
Thank you for that. And
thank you, Julie.
I do think that there's a lot of merit in thinking about how we can provide, what is it that we actually need to provide, and how can we make the best use of the housing stock we've got. Because it is quite hard to make a flat in your house, for example. Council actually has quite a lot of rules about that, and whether there's some bonus, some merit in looking at some of that. I see we've got Carol's hand up. We've got another 5 minutes, so we've still got some time.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think like many houses do have a small 1-bedroom flat underneath. So I think there's probably a lot of scope for that sort of activity, like encouraging people to chunk off a bit of their existing house that they don't need, and maybe supporting them a bit with some cash to help them do it, and making a new development, basically. So I think that's there.
Right, and we've got Bruce waving a hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Look, the affordable housing is a major issue. And I think you've got to actually look at the population that comes into that group. If it's students, and we do have a lot of students in Wellington, and we want to have a lot of students in Wellington, then I think that actually there's some responsibility there on the universities to provide halls of residence or to buy properties for the students. When it's not students, and we're looking then at households which may or may not be families, there is a major problem. And that problem is that in a suburb such as Thorndon, the property prices are now so high that when a house is demolished, it is usually replaced on a 1-for-1 basis with another house. It doesn't necessarily house any more people. It's probably just a bigger new house. So the answer really comes back to the question of whether you are going to have government provided housing or council providing housing, or whether you're expecting a developer to develop something. There are models overseas. My son lives in London in an apartment that he bought off the plan. And when it was built, there were 4 6-story tower blocks. They were only 6 stories high and they had a roof garden. One of those was council housing. So they all look identical from the outside, but one's council housing. But that's a political decision as to whether the council believes it's its responsibility to provide the housing and whether it can afford to do it.
Thank you, Bruce. I've just seen Barbara here, and I'm presuming, Barbara, that I haven't overlooked someone who wanted to give a submission. We weren't on my list. Okay. I'm not hearing any howls of protest there. Colin, your turn.
Two things. Barbara is being held in the waiting room at my request. She's one of these, represents one of these groups that I've been talking about, concerned about health issues and wanting some support penal reforms. Can I just add the comment that a lot of what I've heard just lately with references to the elderly and students highlights what I started off in terms of a more nuanced, if you want to use that word, a more detailed approach at a local authority level to what is going to be needed in the future and how it's going to be provided. And I do think that the Wellington City Council is capable of, as I observe it, of providing the lead here, and it's going to lead into a situation where it's amalgamating or merging with some of the other cities in Wellington generally, given the direction of the legislation that's coming up.
Thank you for that. And Judith, I'm going to go to you for a very last quick comment because we are nearly now out of time, very nearly.
Sorry, this is just to confirm this, the flatting organisation. If you're a student, maybe the university can offer it. But when I first came to New Zealand, I went through so many flats because the rents went up, they wanted to sell the house, they were moving in, and the churn that comes from not having stability in where you're living is really bad, which is why councils and the government, I believe, should take over these so that we have long-term stability. As a teacher, students need long-term stability. There are schools in the country that in the olden days, they used to get through registers, 3 registers a year because children came and went so many times. So we need to get stability of residents as well.
Thank you. Gosh, there's been so many good points made, and I think it's been a really interesting discussion. So thank you to everybody who's contributed and to you know, the time you put into your submissions. And just on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Councillor Young, Councillor Calvert and Councillor Poon, I'd really genuinely like to thank you for your time and for the points you've made. And I know our staff will have been taking notes as we have been as well. So thank you. We have come to the end of our session. I hope you feel you've been heard and have had a good chance to hear from others as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Kia ora all.
Kia ora.